Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Outside the door, hospital life was buzzing. Jacob sat at the resident's desk and filled out the histories of his patients. When he was a student, he had learned to disconnect from everything that interfered with thinking. It was a useful skill he used whenever work was at its fullest the previous night. The same thing had happened. An emergency situation had occurred. After midnight, a bleeding man was brought to the ward. The victim was brought in on a cart. Friends, drinking buddies, who, like the wounded man himself, were far from a little over. Interrupting each other, they told the doctor on duty. "How did the accident happen?" "Doc, we were just sitting around and nothing. And then Leo wanted to do an experiment. His wife keeps reproaching him for not being a man, like Leo's hands don't grow from there. So Leo decided to prove her wrong." From the story, accompanying the patient, Jacob realized that Leo dope in his head wanted to work with metal. But when he turned on the machine, which many years ago he had installed in the garage, something went wrong. The iron from which the accumulated in the houseman was going to make a flower broke out of his hands, and the sharp end entered the stomach. Although they were drinking themselves, they could hardly keep on their feet, and they realized that their friend could give God his soul, because one of the companions to the place of the banquet arrived by horse-drawn transport. They decided not to call an ambulance. "Guys, finally, we'll get to the hospital faster. Otherwise, while our medics arrive, Leo will be glued to his flippers." The owner of the truck was very close to the truth, because the surgeon had to urgently gather a team to save the inadequate. The medics spent almost 4 hours to eliminate the consequences of the favorite experiment. The course of the operation was also complicated by the fact that anesthesia did not take the patient for a long time, and everyone was afraid that he would die from a great loss. But the man crawled out of the clutches of death and barely came off the anesthesia. With astonishment, examined the neighbors on the ward. "Guys, where are we? I don't know this place, and my head is ringing like a bell. Let me get a hangover." It so happened that the patient uttered these first words after the operation during his morning rounds. However, Leo mistook Jacob for one of his friends. But the doctor calmly responded to the patient's request. "Everything, brother, today is canceled. And in general, you will have to stop drinking." Leo shrieked, holding his hand over his stitched-up stomach. "No way, and who are you to tell me what to do?" Jacob calmly began to explain to the patient that he was in the hospital. Only Leo began to understand something, as at that very moment a furious woman with a red mop of hair on her head burst into the room. Not paying attention to the doctors and patients, she rushed to the love and began to shake his infirm body. "Why did you trash the garage? How many times have I asked you not to drive drunkards? But you just can't help yourself." Rough physical impact caused the victim a lot of pain. And he screamed. "Raya's supposed to. I'm in pain, of course." Jacob didn't expect to see such an impressive scene of family strife play out before his eyes. In the first seconds, he was a little confused, and then resolutely stood between the indignant woman and the patient's bed. "Ladies and gentlemen, what are you doing here? We barely saved your husband. Leave the room." The doctor's actions, especially his decisive tone, had a sobering effect on Emily, although she, unlike her husband, had no inclination to drink hard liquor. The woman folded her arms on, breasts of metal. "I'm sorry I'm not myself. He's poisoned my whole life. I can't stand this outrage anymore." Leo intuitively felt that the situation had changed in his favor, and with a pained expression on his face began to justify himself to Ray's wife. "It's all demons. Remember, I told you that the evil force has been hunting for me for a long time. And yesterday, too, as soon as I drank red wine, they and a few other devils began to persuade me to turn on the machine. They told me that I could be the second, and that my work would soon be auctioned off for the price of a nice yacht." The woman mumbled through her tears. "You're a fool, Leo." Turning to Jacob, she began to explain. "My Leo has had an extraordinary talent since childhood. When he was young, he studied to be an artist and drew pictures." Leo interrupted his wife. "How many times can I tell you that they paint pictures? They paint the remarks of the husband." Emily did not react and continued, painted paintings for sale. And then out of the blue, I started singing. I did everything I could to stop him. I chased his friends away. I spiked his vodka with note grass, all to no avail. Leo chuckled. I'm like that. You can't test me with anything. His wife threw a threatening look in his direction and whispered, Doctor, I wish I'd had time to ask you to stitch that ampoule in his stomach before the operation. You know what I mean. Emily looked pleadingly straight into his eyes, and Jacob did not know how to answer her culturally. After a long pause, he said, I understand your anguish, but you are addressing the wrong address. At Emily's eyes sparkled in tears, and she reproachfully declared, Right people say that our medicine is not capable of anything. Vaughn knew that Over the River Lives puts everyone on their feet, does not refuse anyone. The nurse, who was also present in the ward during the rounds, caught a threatening note in the voice of the local resident, and became, You are right, to pull Emily out of the room. Go, please, do not interfere with the doctor examining the patients. Proudly shook the red-haired Punches. Emily left the room and Jacob was able to continue examining his patients. After the rounds, Nurse Tonika, as if, by the way, told the doctor you are a new person at us, and have not yet had time to get acquainted with the peculiarities of local life. The fact is that specialists do not stay with us for long, so the population is forced to turn to healers, although most of such healers are charlatans. There is no other alternative. It is true that a young witch doctor who settled 3 years ago by the river really helps people. Tomichka wanted to add something else to her story, but at the last second she changed her mind. Jacob did not pay much attention to her words, although there was a case in his life, confirming the high effectiveness of unconventional methods of treatment. The man tried not to remember about that period, as it caused heartache. In Jacob's life, there were many difficult moments that he wanted to forget about. More than once he tried to start from scratch, but he did not always succeed. He had set out a month ago with such intentions too, although he hadn't planned a change of residence. But in the surgical department of the city hospital, where he had worked for almost 7 years, there was an unhealthy environment. And it happened after the superintendent appointed a reprimand Peter after the retirement of the old superintendent. The duties of the head for almost 6 months performed Jacob, and everyone was convinced that his candidacy is about to be approved at the top. But these optimistic predictions were not destined to come true. One morning, Jacob habitually opened the door of his office and froze from surprise. Behind his desk, a strange man stretched out languidly. Jacob did not start a scandal and delicately asked, Sorry, I do not know what to call you, but I wonder why you are in my office. The guest jumped up and in one leap crossed the distance separating them, without giving Jacob a second thought. He shyly embraced him. Jacob, my friend, don't you recognize me? Jacob took a closer look and hardly recognized the fat man. If you take off the smugness of Peter's face, who in his student years was a course younger than him, already then about this guy there were ambiguous rumors that like this is the son of an official from the highest echelon, and therefore in front of him automatically open all the doors, because Jacob did not have to previously cross paths with Peter, as he was called in the eyes of acquaintances. He did not pay attention to such gossip. Jacob didn't think fate would bring him back together with this upstart. 15 years after graduation, Peter's embrace lasted longer than the time foreseen for the summer. So Jacob had to use force to free himself from his guest. He responded to Peter's ebullient greeting, quite restrained. I'm sorry, I really didn't recognize you right away. You've changed a lot, you know. Peter immediately took offense. Every man has his faults. Although, in principle, my imposing build does not cause me much discomfort. Genetics is to blame. My appetite is fine. We're all Peter people, but I don't consider it a disadvantage. Jacob did not want to listen to the summarily speech of the visitors, because he had a busy working day ahead of him. Peter, I basically don't care what your weight is, and I'm not interested in other people's personal problems. It's surgery day, and every minute counts. But I realize it's no coincidence that you're in my office this morning. I'd like to hear an explanation for this intrusion. Peter was much shorter than Jacob, and he did not succeed in looking down on his rival. He thrust up his chin and spoke defiantly to Jacob. "This is not an invasion. As of today, I am acting superintendent. My nomination was approved last night." There was an awkward pause. Apparently, Peter expected his opponent to object or bemoan the loss of his position. But Jacob took the news very calmly. "Thank you. Now everything is clear." Jacob quickly gathered his papers and headed for the exit. "That's it. I've cleared the room. You can settle in." Peter barely shook his head, making it clear that from this day on he would decide whom to punish and whom to pardon. And indeed, with the appearance of a new head, the situation in the department has deteriorated sharply. Not only Peter had no practical experience, but he was giving out his recommendations left and right. Peter brought his own staff to the department, which the old workers did not want to put up with. To their discontent, the new manager replied, "I'm not keeping anyone here. Who doesn't like a free exit? There are no irreplaceable people." Jacob tried to reason with Peter. "Peter, I think you got off on the wrong foot. You can't throw away experienced personnel like that. After all, medicine is a field where the loss of one good fighter can affect the result of the entire battle." Peter's sensible remark has got his chin up again. "Jacob, I do not need your advice. My main task is to organize the work in the unit entrusted to me, and I will pursue that goal with all means at my disposal. Do you like it or not?" Jacob had to keep his opinions to himself. In a few months at the helm, Peter had dispersed the old staff. He encouraged snitching in every possible way and liked to organize at the meetings demonstrative floggings of the guilty. At the same time, Peter completely disregarded the rules of medical anthology. When Jacob reprimanded him, he in his characteristic manner replied, "I do not care about your offenses. In my department, everyone has to work with the utmost dedication, and people worked hard. Many could not stand such a schedule and left. Only Jacob continued to believe that things could change for the better. But as the days went by, months went by, and the situation only worsened. It became completely unbearable when Peter single-handedly, without coordination with common sense, began to promote the products of his own relative, who headed a large pharmaceutical company. Since Jacob was the lead surgeon, the superintendent summoned him to her office. Jacob intuitively felt that the upcoming conversation did not bode well for him. Peter, as always, with ostentatious arrogance said, "Sit down, Jacob. You know yourself. There is no truth in feet." Familial address cut on the nerves, but Jacob restrained himself. "It's all right, Peter. I'll stand. I don't have time to sit around. The patients are waiting." The superintendent's face was distorted by a squeamish grimace. "Oh ho ho. You'd think you were indispensable. I have to start by reprimanding you. Remember once and for all, I am your boss and you are my subordinates, so address me properly. I mean by name and patronymic." The insolence of this self-loving baboon was infuriating. But Jacob emphasized, politely replied, "I have exactly the same counter-proposal for you. I, like you, have an extremely negative attitude to any manifestation of panic." Peter's eyebrows went up. "Even so. Well, I'll take that into consideration. Jacob, now let's get down to business." The superintendent tossed a small box across the table. "This is a new breakthrough drug developed by a domestic manufacturer. Look to whom in our department it can be assigned." Jacob immediately realized where the head of the department was bending. He forcefully pushed back the package with the drug. "I will not prescribe an unapproved drug. I'm ordering you." Peter's face reddened with indignation and covered with sweaty, twin sweats, but Jacob was not impressed by his anger. The surgeon firmly repeated, "I will not prescribe to the sick, untested remedies. And if you insist, Peter, I will appeal to the federal ministry. You don't think you alone have an omnipotent hand." After this altercation, the relationship between the chief and the lead surgeon soared completely. Peter, with the help of his snitches, watched the surgeon's every move. And when Jacob made an inexcusable mistake, refusing one patient in hospitalization, the head of the case blown up. Jacob was summoned to the regional department. They read out the entire form. He received a reprimand with a note and was deprived of a bonus for 6 months. Endless battles with the superintendent swamped Jacob. He felt on the verge of a breakdown and decided to have a man-to-man talk with Peter. Peter listened to him, and then with the same ostentatious superiority, said to Jacob, "Maybe I'll forgive you, if you ask me nicely." "Good. How's that?" Jacob expected the chief to start pushing that dubious drug on him again. But Peter came up with a more elegant punishment. When you need something badly, it's not a bad thing to get down on your knees. Jacob laughed outright. "Peter, you should definitely consult a psychiatrist. You're overcome with unhealthy fantasies." That same day, he wrote a letter of resignation. One of the best surgeons in the city had been out of work for a month. He was about to take a job in the ER when he got the call from Andrew. "Jacob, I heard a rumor that you're out of work." "Yeah, I took a short break, but I got some ideas. I'm looking to change the field a little bit." Andrew yelled into the phone. "Don't even think about it. You're a surgeon from God. You dropped in on me. I want to offer you a place." Andrew Jacob was in the same class with Andrew. They were on a humanitarian mission together in Africa. Then their paths diverged. Andrew later graduated from the military department and was in hot spots. Once he was very unlucky and got a serious wound, after which he could not operate. When he was offered a position in the Regional Ministry of Health, he accepted. As a man devoted to his favorite profession, Andrew did everything to save human life, in the global sense of the expression, having learned about the difficulties of Jacob, with whom they had been traveling around the world for several years. The high official immediately engaged in the employment of a friend. Jacob did not wait for a second invitation, and on the same day went to visit whom he greeted him warmly and immediately said, "There is a vacancy for a surgeon. Of course, you can refuse such an unenviable position, but this district hospital in the next 2 years will be renovated. I don't have to tell you what prospects await you." Jacob weighed the pros and cons and agreed to move to the backwoods. "Thank you, Andrew. I don't really have much of a choice, so I'll take you up on your offer." Andrew gave the surgeon a friendly pat on the shoulder. "A change of scenery will do you good. Perhaps in this you will meet your destiny." This wish embarrassed the man, who had long ago given up the search for his happiness. All his attempts to merge the family nest ended in painful losses, and he had long ago got rid of illusions. He put all his energies into his work. Sergiv was not distinguished by its scale. This small town is nestled on a hill and terrain. From the cave they are along and across, large and small rivulets. Many natural water bodies did not have names for easy orientation. The local population used such terms as the river behind the dark forest, or the river near the poultry farm. Molly learned the peculiarities of local toponymy as a child, when she and her mother came to visit Wendy. But in 20 years, things have changed. Even in such a wooded corner as Native Village, only an unnamed rivulet, flowing almost right next to the house. The old Snakar still rolled merrily in its waters into the unknown distance. In the spring, it fell apart, flooding the nearby meadows, but by the end of May it returned to its usual course again. And then it could be waded across on any property. Wendy's modest home had long ago been on a topsy-turvy path. For dozens of years, this woman had been doing her best to help the people of the district center and the small villages scattered on both sides of the creek. When Znaharina finished her earthly journey, the baton was taken over by her young relative Molly, appeared in the cabin across the creek in the middle of winter. In midsummer, she gave birth to a baby boy. The villagers told various legends about the girl and the unknown father of her child. Although more than 3 years have passed since that time, the folk myth-making has not died down. Of course, to the very heroine of these stories reached the scandalous rumors. But Molly did not attach any importance to them. When especially curious comrades pestered the girl with questions, she smilingly answered all sorts of in their own sophisticated. Such an answer caused misunderstanding and gossip, and tried to find out whether you do not care what people say about the forest with the same childish smile answered, "Let them talk." That's what language is given to man to speak. A smart person would think before believing such stories. They are clever. Everything is forgivable for such people. Such statements of the young Snakar caused bewilderment. A girl of 25, no more than 25, and she talks as if she had a whole life behind her. However, those who expressed such an opinion was not far from the truth, because in her short life, this girl had time to learn and the bitterness of the loss of a loved one and betrayal of a friend. But she did not break and continued to believe in people. A new day was just dawning brightly in the east, and Molly was already on her feet. She had set out a plan of work from the evening and now began to fulfill the first item of breakfast. If someone had told her 5 years ago that she would be counting minutes and seconds, Molly would not have believed such nonsense. The boy mumbled something in his sleep, and the young woman rushed to her son's crib. But the alarm was false, and she tiptoed into the miniature kitchen and began cooking. Although Molly had little culinary experience, she was pressured by her mother. "Daughter, remember once and for all, you can only cook food when you're in a good mood. If the hostess is angry or dissatisfied, it will definitely affect the taste of the food." Mom left this world more than 5 years ago, but her invisible presence Molly felt almost constantly. In the most difficult moments of life, she mentally turned to the only native person, and the image of her mother immediately appeared in front of her eyes. Today, also a deceased parent. Early in the morning, she visited her daughter. She was smiling as always, but the words spoken to her made the girl shudder. "Molly, don't trust those who make sweet promises. Be careful and take care of your son." The young woman pondered over this message from another world. While she was preparing breakfast for herself and her little son, she knew very well that the meaning of these words would be revealed later. It had happened more than once, but the girl never ceased to be amazed at this strange connection with the deceased, the mother, and the surprising truthfulness of her predictions. When it happened for the first time, she thought that on the background of wild stress, she was slowly going crazy to prevent unwanted consequences. Molly recounted verbatim to Wendy the conversations with the calm mother. But the old woman only grinned. "Don't be afraid. It's fate sending you signs through the image of her mother. Such messages should not be ignored." Molly didn't believe the old woman, who was also a very distant relative. "Grandma Wendy, it's all bullshit. I don't believe in all sorts of otherworldly forces and evil doom." Wendy looked at her so that it was her looks. Everything inside went cold. "You don't believe and you laugh in vain. It won't be long before you realize what you've been given this gift for, will you?" Molly laughed again. "Grandmother, do you consider the voices that trouble me a gift?" "Of course I do. After all, everything you hear comes true later. Almost everything. But it seems like pure coincidence to me. Remember, idiot, nothing in this world happens by chance. Everything has a meaning, but not everyone understands it." Grandma Wendy often said strange things. Many people were afraid of her, but they still went to her for help. Molly looked at the picture of Grandma Faith in the antique frame and sighed, and "Mommy left me. And you, Grandma, left without forgiving 6 too. But thank you for not forgetting, visiting nonetheless. I get only good signs from you, and I try to do good myself." Molly did not have time to finish this pleasant thought, because someone insistently knocked on the window, who came so early. The woman rushed to the door, but did not immediately manage with the shield. The knock was repeated to the landlady. She had to ask the early visitor, "Don't bang so loudly. You'll wake up the baby." The request was heard, and the knocking stopped. The young snackar opened the door with difficulty and squeezed into the narrow space. Lucy Guest at once expressed her displeasure. "What are you so long entrenched or hiding? Who in the house from the eyes of strangers?" The visitor looked around, but found nothing suspicious. "I was going to visit you yesterday, but I didn't have time. So many things to do around the house, I have no time for anything. And then there's this damn splinter." The woman nodded at her bandaged palm. "I got it 3 days ago. I thought it was nothing, but it was just a fire burning and twitching inside." Molly asked for a guest. "Aunt Lucy, why don't you sit in the chair and I'll look at your arm?" Lucy lamented about her miserable life. The healer complied with the request, but as soon as the hand sign touched her arm, she cried out, "You be careful, or I might pass out from the pain. I've had that happen to me before when I pulled a tooth. It took half an hour to pump me out." "Aunt Lucy, but I can't treat you if I can't see the wound." "I'm telling you it's a splinter. There's no wound. I'll unwrap the bandage myself. Kukushkin began to remove the bandage, and Molly did not hold back her exclamation when she saw the woman's palms swollen across the wall into her neck. Aunt Lucy here, already herbs and lotions cannot help. You need to run to a surgeon immediately, or you may lose a limb. The visitor waved her inflamed palm. What kind of healer are you if you send me to a doctor? I don't take on anything I'm not sure of. In this case, I doubt conservative methods will help you. Lucy swung his sore arm again. Look, don't act so smart. You've got all these words and you expect me to believe you. You don't know anything, you're only good at twirling your tail. You can't do anything but twirl your tail around and take advantage of other people's fiancés. Molly knew about the character of this woman, but did not think that Aunt Lucy would allow herself such a prank in someone else's house. Trying to keep calm, she asked the guest, "Why did you come to me, for help or to humiliate? And please don't yell. I have a small child." But these requests could not stop Lucy. She began to denounce the witch doctor for all her sins. Who are you to make a remark to me? In the old days, people like you were burned at the stake, and rightly so. Don't mess with the people, you charlatan. And the stranger's indignant cries of the visitors were interrupted by a child's crying. Little Zach jumped out in his pajamas and barefoot. He fought with fear and cried, "Mommy, I'm afraid this Aunt Witch will chase her away instead of apologizing and leaving the stranger's house." Lucy attacked the baby. "It wasn't me." "Apparently, boy, it's your mama. Let her tell you who she took you from. You can tell who your daddy is without her confession. Sam Jones, the naked eye can detect further mayhem in your home." Molly couldn't stand it. She went at the visitors with determination, although she was much larger than her in stature. "Aunt Lucy, leave nicely, or I'll have to use force." Lucy backed down, but she didn't give up. "We'll see who's who. I'll tell the police. Let 'em find out what kind of bird you are and what right you have to occupy this house. And I'll inform your superiors. Who are you really? And they'll broom you out of the poultry farm. You'll be sorry you ever messed with me." Before slamming the door, Molly, as calmly as possible, said, "Aunt Lucy, you go to the hospital right now. I hear there's a new surgeon there. They say he's very experienced." Instead of thanking her for the sound advice, Lucy launched a stone to slam all the doors shut. Then she muttered curses and headed out. Zach sobbed some more. Molly did her best to calm the baby. She pressed her son to her breast and whispered, "Don't be afraid. Sonny, we are with you. I won't give you to anyone." The mother's caress had a calming effect, and Zach became quiet. Molly continued to rock the baby in her arms, remembering how her mother always found the right words when children's troubles happened to her. Tears did not flow from her eyes. And the young woman silently whispered, "Mommy, how bad it is that you are not with me. We are all alone in this world." In her short life, Molly had experienced loneliness in all its forms. Her first conscious thoughts were related to this unpleasant feeling. But at an early age, she didn't understand why her daddy didn't want to play with her. When her mother was at work, at any request of the girl, the head of the Edwards family rudely replied, "I have no time to entertain you. You have plenty of toys. Go to your room." If Molly did not obey her father's orders, he would push her out the door. When William was particularly angry, he could miscalculate his strength, and his rough touches left bruises on the girl's arms. One day, the mother was worried sick when she saw purple spots on her daughter's hands. "Molly, where did you get that?" The daughter immediately blurted out, "Daddy did it to me." I didn't listen to him, and he got angry when he heard the girl's answer. William was furious. "Molly, who taught you to lie?" Such a little girl is already lying, noticing the wary look of his wife. The man began to explain to her excitedly. "Betty, who do you believe me, or this dog? You know very well that little children are prone to lying. Molly is an overly active little girl and is always bruising herself during her playtime." Betty replied not right away. "See, I might have believed your version if it weren't for one thing: children are more likely to have bruises on their feet. And there are blue spots on the shoulders and arms. And it's hematoma-like in nature. It's not hard to figure out how they got there." Molly remembers well how, at these words of her mother, the father again threw her an angry look. But at the same time, he faintly asked her daughter, Tell Mommy it's not true. Have I ever hurt you?" The man's question went unanswered because Molly ran off to her room. Already at the age of 5, she knew very well how an honest answer could turn out for her. She drew patterns on the horse glass with her finger until late at night and dreamed of a very different life. Betty, after that egregious incident, also drew the appropriate conclusions. She placed her daughter with friends or acquaintances for the time she was on duty. William did not object to this change, and when Molly returned home, he wryly remarked, "Ours is back. And how is it at other people's aunts' houses?" "Better than at home with Daddy, I guess." Although the girl didn't like the nomadic lifestyle, she answered her father's questions with an affirmative nod of her head. From then on, she stopped seeing William as Molly's father and protector, avoided talking to him at all costs, and tried not to be alone with a man from whom undisguised hatred emanated. Despite the differences between the spouses, the Edwards family was considered exemplary because in those years, above all valued above all material well-being. Neighbors, acquaintances openly envied the couple. Grandmothers in the evenings on the bench at the entrance discussed. Such good, positive people. Both doctors get a decent salary. They have a car. The apartment is also richly furnished. What else do you need for a happy life? This is a question Betty has not found an answer to for many years. Indeed, professionally, she and her husband were doing quite well. She was the head of the environmental department at the city hospital, while her husband held a senior position in a private clinic. His father, who had been a prominent financial official under the socialist system, had provided him with a warm place. The Edwards family was not in need either, although there was no extra money. But for all the apparent prosperity was not the main component of love. Betty and William studied at the same institute, but in different departments. What happens in a student environment? The young people first developed a friendly relationship. Betty was courted by William's friend, who then had an accident. In the most difficult moments, William gave the girl a friendly shoulder. "Betty, you can always count on me. You've lost a loved one, and I've lost my best friend. It seems to me that together you and I will be able to bear this loss more easily." The girl gratefully accepted the guy's words. But their relationship very soon ceased to be friendly. William told the girl Betty more and more insistently every day that you should let go of the past. You can't get your old love back, and you shouldn't dwell on it. You're a young, beautiful woman, and I think it's stupid to condemn yourself to loneliness. Believe me, 5 years will pass, and you will regret that you missed the opportunity to be happy. William made speeches like that almost every day, and Betty gave in. But there was one more thing that made her give in to the guy's entreaties. Soon after the tragic death of her fiancé, she realized that she was expecting a child. But William Edwards reacted positively to this fact. He assured the girl Vetui, "I consider it my duty to take care of my best friend's child. So the sooner you and I formalize the relationship, the better it will be for all of us." This confession completely reassured the girl, and she agreed to become William's wife. But apparently, the groom did not hold back and told his father that his young wife was expecting a child from another man. Edwards Sr. was furious, and without choosing words, began to reproach his son. Only a complete idiot could come up with such an idea. Have you seen any conscientious movies? Voluntarily take responsibility for someone else's child? Well, I'll tell you straight, son, once you've got it on your shoulders, you carry that burden until you get tired of it. But in my house, William has decided to correct his father. Betty's expecting a girl. I don't care. A girl or a boy. I do not wish to see her child in my home and will never acknowledge it. Of course, Molly was not privy to the backstory of its birth, but she did not have the opportunity to learn of her grandparents' love, as her father's parents ignored the fact of its very existence. William himself subsequently repudiated the commitment he had, in a burst of the kindest affection, willingly made before she was born. The truth that she was not his own daughter, Molly learned only after the death of her mother. Betty kept this family secret until her last breath. The sudden departure of her mother was a terrible blow to Molly. After all, Betty had never complained about her health. She ran in the mornings, and on weekends, she did not visit the swimming pool. This resilient woman seemed to have endless energy. Even William often joked about it. Betty, I'm sorry, but I often think there's a perpetual motion machine inside you. I'm completely exhausted by lunchtime, and there's no mistaking you. On such remarks, Molly's mother answered simply, William, unlike you, I cannot relax, so I try to always be in tone. The smile disappeared from the woman's face as she added thoughtfully, it's true that I've been having a lot of headaches lately. The girls took my blood pressure, and it's higher than normal. Molly did not hold back, despite William's presence. Mom, is it time for you to take a break? You should go to a resort near the sea and have a good rest. The head of the family, with unconcealed irony, exclaimed, dreams in you are weakness. Molly, do you believe in what you're suggesting? Who will let your mom go to this resort? I mean, she's indispensable. She's used to pulling the whole department. Daughter and mother exchanged understanding glances and did not enter into an argument. They knew that such verbal altercations most often end in a heated scandal with insults. Molly locked herself in her room, immersed in reading notes. She too decided to devote herself to medicine, as her mother, and studied at the third year of medical university. That momentous conversation in the kitchen was soon forgotten. Only later, when Mom was gone, in the memory involuntarily surfaced moments that Molly had not given importance to before. Subsequently, the girl repeatedly chastised herself for inattention. The alarm beacon didn't work, and when her mother had to call an ambulance to the house, the woman's well-being deteriorated suddenly. She turned pale and grabbed the back of a chair. Daughter, I don't feel so good. Dial 03. The emergency team arrived just 5 minutes later. The doctor scolded Veta for not caring about her health, and then gave her an injection. After that, the mother felt much better. The head of the household was not at home at the time. Betty asked her daughter not to say anything to him. Daughter, your mother was just a little tired. So my blood pressure's skyrocketing. Tomorrow morning, I'll call the chief and take a couple of days off. But in the morning, the woman forgot her intention and flew to work. Molly tried to stop her. Mommy, you were really sick yesterday and you promised to stay home. Betty looked at her watch and answered on the run, daughter, let's talk about it later. I'm feeling pretty well today. Wednesday is my surgery day, so I can't just take a vacation. You're a medical student, so you should know that your duty to your patients is more important than a minor ailment. Molly was at a lecture when the cell phone in her jacket pocket. Seeing an unfamiliar number, she felt very anxious and asked to get off. An unfamiliar female voice and dryly informed Molly, Betty, I've gotten sick after surgery. She's in intensive care now. She's having a stroke. But don't worry. Our doctors will do everything they can. Without hearing the optimistic message, Molly, the head nurse of the environmental unit, ran to the hospital. She spent 3 days in front of the ICU doors, believing in the medic's prognosis. But despite the efforts of the best specialists, Betty passed away without regaining consciousness. She was only 43 years old. Everything that followed was a blur. On the day of her mother's funeral, it was raining heavily, so the ceremony was held in a crumpled manner without any heartwarming speeches. After the cemetery, everyone went to the restaurant, where William decided to organize a wake. Molly refused to take part in this obligatory meal, which caused the anger of her father, and then she decided to stand out. Think what people will say if you don't show up at the wake. The girl replied in a colorless voice, I can't get my mom back anyway. I can't eat and drink and watch others fill their wombs. You see, I can't. William swore profanely, then said he didn't want to tell you on a day like this, but you asked for it. I'm sick of your antics, and I'm not going to put up with them from now on. Mother's gone. You can't count on me. The meaning of these parental words came to the girl later, when she discovered that the refrigerator was completely empty. When her father came home, she told him that they had nothing left but pasta. William looked at her as if he was seeing her for the first time. Did you forget? I warned you that it's every man for himself now. How old are you? Is that right? Soon to be 20. Mature enough to earn your own food. Molly was stunned by her father's words. Dad, I have to get my diploma. Go ahead. I don't forbid you, but I don't intend to support you. The man hesitated for a few seconds, and then, looking directly at the girl, in the eyes said, Mother did not tell you. I didn't want to spoil family relations. The thing is, I'm not your father in the sense of biological connection. Your mom got pregnant by another man who left her. I married her out of pity. It was the second blow that completely broke the young girl. All night she cried at the window, no longer hoping for help. The next morning, Molly did not go to the university because she had to look for a livelihood. She spent several days looking for a suitable job, but found nothing. All the following days were like a terrible dream. Molly woke up in the morning and went to the kitchen to prepare some food from the leftovers, but she quickly ran out of pasta and cereals. There was nothing to satisfy her hunger. This black day just coincided with the day after the funeral of her mother, because she had no one to consult with. The girl went to the cemetery, where she spent the whole day until the evening. She went home only after an old woman who passed by shook her head in sadness. Grandfather by evening and go home. The deceased don't like to be disturbed at a time like this. Molly thanked the woman and left the cemetery. But another shock awaited her at home. As soon as she opened the apartment door, she saw a strange woman in the hallway wearing her mom's slippers on her feet. Molly's eyes went black, and she screamed, "Get out of here. Don't you dare touch my mom's things." The woman was frightened. From the kitchen came William's voice. "Molly, calm down. I warned you the other day that things would be different in this apartment now. In fact, although you are registered here, you have no rights to this apartment because you are not a blood relative." The man appeared in the hallway with a frying pan in his hands. "But I'm not chasing you away yet. Though things may change if you show your true self." Molly immediately arose. Edwards continued, "And now we can move on to introductions. This is Vanessa, my colleague. Please love and welcome. Dinner is almost ready. I hope you haven't forgotten that today is the 9th day. I haven't forgotten. I was at the cemetery. Molly wanted to refuse dinner, but hunger took over and she went to the kitchen. When Edwards graciously invited her to the table, she did not listen to what he was talking about with his colleague, because her thoughts were occupied with solving one question: how to go on living. After the final dinner, William went to see Vanessa off. Molly went to her room, the worries of the last days and her nervous system, and the girl felt incredibly tired. She did not notice how she fell into a heavy, restless sleep. It was then that she had her first dream. Molly's mother did not remember what the late mother said, but in the morning she felt relieved. It was as if she had recovered from a long illness. Another event happened that day that would later change her life. She decided to go out in the morning to look for a job. She was immediately lucky. At the bus stop, she noticed an advertisement that attracted her. A day caregiver for a paralyzed woman was needed. Molly tore off a piece of paper with a phone and immediately dialed the number listed there. She was answered by a young man. "Yes, we urgently need a caregiver, preferably with a medical degree. If you meet these 2 requirements, come on over." The man dictated her address and she was about to set off, but accidentally pushed the woman to wait at the bus stop for her bus. Molly hastily apologized, and at that moment she heard someone's voice. "This woman is about to back up and get hit by the bus. Help her." Before Molly knew it, the woman she had accidentally hit recently was rushing forward. But she didn't realize her strength. Molly managed to pick her up as she fell. The old lady was in shock. "I could have been hit by a car. Thank you, Molly. You saved me. Let me thank you." The woman went through her purse, but Molly absolutely refused to take her money. Good deeds don't require payment. "It's not nice that I helped you out of trouble." In high spirits, she went to the address, where she was met by the owner of a pleasant baritone. He helped Molly to take off her cloak and only then held out his hand to Martin. Molly gave her name. The landlord led her deep into the apartment. "The 3 of us live in this big apartment. I have a purely female company, so it is me who has to solve all the problems. My grandmother Lola needs care. My mother and I not so long ago took her from the village, because there she was alone. But apparently, the change of residence did not go in favor of my grandmother. She decided to put us in order, but forgot about her age. As a result of a fall from a stepladder, she suffered a concussion. I don't know much about medicine, but after that injury, Grandma's legs gave out. Her hands are fine, and her speech is almost completely recovered. But she can't walk. Molly assured the young man I can handle it, although I do not have a diploma yet, but with the duties of a caregiver will not be a problem. I'm in my 3rd year of college, but at the moment I have a difficult life situation, so I had to leave the university for the time being. Martin listened attentively to the girl and suggested that Molly explain the reasons for your difficult situation. You don't have to, especially if you find it difficult to talk about it. Martin smiled and pointed to the door in front of which they had stopped. In this room is your future patient. Come in. Moore is looking forward to seeing his assistant. She's very sociable. Lola greeted Molly with a charming smile. What a cute little girl. I promise I won't be cranky and will do everything you tell me to do. My first day as a caregiver flew by. Martin's grandmother was not at all shy of the new person. She was happy to share her memories with Molly and generally acted as if she had known her for a long time. When Molly returned home, she remembered the day's incident at the bus stop and whispered in horror, "How did I not realize it was Mom's voice? Am I really going crazy?" Fear crept into Molly's heart, and she even thought about going to a specialist about the strange voices. But then she changed her mind. Basically, I don't mind the voices. And if I go to a psychiatrist, I may be placed in a closed institution. It's probably just a temporary disorder, and it appeared against the background of severe stress. The most important thing now is to be able to earn a living. With this optimistic thought, the girl fell asleep after the first working day. Soon Molly regained her former confidence and was happy to wake up in the morning. She hurried to her patient, and they spent the whole day talking. Martin met Molly in the morning and walked her to the bus stop in the evening. He didn't like to talk about himself. Only once he confessed to Grandma that I had wonderful children. But with my mother, we don't have a good relationship. She's always trying to impose things on me that contradict my principles. You know, when I was a child, I dreamed of becoming an adult as soon as possible, to get rid of my mother and their moralizing with Martin. Molly felt free and at ease. She noticed that the young man was also showing interest. Many times the girl caught his long gaze, and it is a mutual sympathy. It did not escape the keen eye. "Lola, you are such a handsome couple. I look at you and can't help but admire you. It's been a month." Molly's ward began to sit up with her help and then stood on her feet. The old woman considered her healing a miracle. "You got me back on my feet. I didn't believe I could walk anymore. But when you appeared, I felt strong. Just the touch of your hand helps." Molly, it was nice to hear the old lady say that, but she didn't pay much attention to it. Meanwhile, her relationship with Martin became more romantic. The young man began to give her flowers. Once he invited her to the movies. After the session, they walked along the waterfront, and Martin uncertainly suggested, "Molly, you could live with us? It would be more convenient for everyone." The girl doubted the correctness of such a decision. "How would your mom feel about it? Are you sure that she will like the constant presence of a stranger in the apartment?" "Honestly, I don't know. She's a very unpredictable person, and she's a little unpredictable." "Then don't make her angry. By the way, she's due back from a business trip any day now. It was her idea to hire a nurse for Grandma. I was totally against it at first, and now? Now I'm glad I listened to Mother. But that's probably the only positive example." Lissa showed up unannounced. Molly was in the bathroom, when she heard strange footsteps in the hallway. She shouted loudly to Martin, "We're having a water treatment. Don't come in yet." But the door swung open. "Who's that? Who's making such a racket in here?" Lola answered. "Oh, the traveler's here, and she's not happy as usual. Or a black cat crossed your path on the way home." "Mom, are you always joking?" Lisa went into the room and kissed her mother. Lola was touched by his daughter's attention. "Martin and I have been waiting for you. He had to sit with me for almost 2 weeks, and then he came to us through an ad. This beautiful girl is here. Her name is Molly. She forgot we were going to hire a caregiver," the old lady mumbled. "Now I see who has a short memory." Although at first Lisa had treated the young caregiver with ostentatious coolness. Over time, their relationship warmed. Martin's mother was particularly impressed by the fact that one day during dinner, Molly confidently told Lisa, "You should not put on pickles because you have diseased kidneys." If I'm not mistaken, The woman dropped the cutlery from her hands and stared at the girl. "How do you know about my kidneys?" Molly made an uncertain gesture with her hand. But she did not answer the question. She realized how her story would be received by the voice. But the hostess was struck by the girl's abilities. She wanted further proof. For this purpose, Lisa invited her friends. The woman even thought of a suitable reason to drink tea in pleasant company. Molly felt uncomfortable surrounded by status ladies and wanted to leave the room of the hostess. But Lisa asked her to. "Molly is scanning my girls. Tell me, what are their hidden ailments?" The girl was dumbfounded. "And I'll tell you later, well." She hurried to her ward's room and took a long time to come to her senses. The old woman noticed that the girl was distraught. "Molly, what's wrong? Or were you offended by a close call?" "No, everything is fine." Soon the hostess escorted the guests and looked into Lola's room. "Molly, I need to talk to you in confidence." The girl realized that Lisa would ask her for information about the hidden ailments of her friends. But there was nowhere to go. So she told her that one woman had no health problems, just a little nervous. "Second, in Molly's opinion, you should get a checkup right away. There's something wrong with her heart. There may be a congenital defect that hasn't been detected yet. It's been a few days. I meet Molly in the hallway in the morning, and the landlady mumbles, 'Yes, your prognosis has been confirmed.' There is indeed a hidden defect. That's just amazing. Tell me, how do you manage to see what doctors can't see?" The girl didn't know what to answer and only shrugged her shoulders. Martin's mother continued to express admiration for the girl's talent. "You can make money on it. Such practices are in trend today. Thank you, Lisa, for your advice. My plans do not include shamanism." The hostess shook her lips unhappily. "Don't be so sure. Maiden, don't you know what lies ahead? It is possible that your abilities will help you survive one day." Surprisingly, the woman's words proved prophetic. One day, Molly came home, but could not open the door of her apartment because the key did not want to enter the keyhole. The girl threw with irritation. "What nonsense," and squeezed the bell button with force. The door was opened by an old acquaintance, Vanessa. She also wrinkled her nose. "It's you, Molly. We decided to change the lock. There's a lot of shady people hanging around the entryway." The girl tried to mentally calm herself down, although inside the volcano was rolling without saying a word. She went to her room, but it was a shambles. Molly shouted, "What is this?" Edwards appeared from the bathroom. He wore his robe open, but he wasn't even embarrassed to see his stepdaughter. "Our gypsy has arrived." "What are we yelling?" Molly said. "My room. Why is it such a mess? And why did you change the lock?" William was pleased with the result of his actions, because he managed to break the resistance of this stubborn girl. He'd shown her who was boss in this apartment. Now it remains to enjoy his victory. The man gritted his teeth. "This is no longer your room. My wife Vanessa will now be in charge of this apartment." Molly felt her breath catching. She said in a low voice, "Daddy, how are you? After all, it's only been 3 months since Mom died." Edwards laughed in her face. "I don't care about convention, and don't call me Dad. I hope you're not so dumb that you don't realize you have nothing more to do in this apartment." Vanessa shifted her gaze fearfully from Molly to William. Her well-groomed face was contorted in a grimace of fear. At the peak of passion, Molly again heard her mother's voice, which predicted the impostor's doom. In a ringing voice, she said, "You rejoice too soon. Mr. Edwards, it is written on your fate to be an eternal widower and your days. You'll end up in an asylum for the mentally ill. Get out of here, witch." William clenched his fists and moved on the girl, but Molly managed to get Yurka out through the open door. About an hour she wandered around the city and only then decided to call Magtip. The young man listened to her and firmly said, "Do not even think. Come to us." There was nowhere to go, and Molly accepted the young man's offer. She did not refuse Magtipu when he made her a marriage proposal. Soon the young people signed and life began to improve little by little. But despite her unique abilities, the girl did not know that the most difficult tests were ahead of her. Zach was cranky in the morning, so Molly was worried about the state of health of her son. Over these few years, she had learned not only to identify diseases almost without error, but also to select the most effective ways of healing. The young woman stretched out her hands and to the mother of little fancies. "Show me where you have a pain." The boy touched his forehead and hummed. Molly touched her lips to the baby's head. "Oh, I think we've forgiven it all a little bit because Zach doesn't listen to Mommy. When it's cold outside, you have to wear a hat. Don't you like hats? That's okay. Now Mommy will give you milk with honey and the cold will run away." The little boy asked in surprise. "It will run away and hide, like that aunt who came to see us yesterday." "Son, are you confused? No one came to our house yesterday." The boy was stubbornly insistent. "My aunt came, and I saw her from the window. She was hiding over there." The boy pointed to the barn. "I wanted to tell her it was wrong to peek, but I couldn't, because she ran away." Molly pulled her son close to her and smacked his hot forehead again. "You imagined all this because you're sick. Don't worry, we won't let anyone in with you." The boy echoed, "We won't let anyone in." The young mother went to the kitchen to prepare a warm drink for the child. But at that moment, a shadow flashed outside the window, and Zach shrieked, "Mommy, she's here again." Molly jumped outside and looked around. She clearly felt the presence of a stranger. Grabbing a pitchfork in her hands, the woman went to the barn. "Who's hiding in there? You better come out, or I might hurt unintentionally." For persuasiveness, Molly shook the pitchfork from the yellowed thickets and weeds. A woman's voice was heard. First, a woman's head emerged from the grass, then the observant fully marked out in space. Molly exclaimed, "Julia Jones. What are you doing here, and why are you hiding in my yard?" The young woman began to grow diligently. "Tied up the ringleaders. It's the elderly blades of grass wanted to see the witch doctor." Jacob led the space of the yard perplexed look. "And what's so interesting?" Uninvited guests desperately waved her hand. "I'm not interested in your houses. I wanted to look at the boy. Does he really look like my Sam?" "What are you talking about?" Molly realized that Lucy had spread the gossip around the village. She wasn't going to justify herself to that poor woman. A husband who never missed a woman's skirt. Jones continued to rub it in, and the witch doctor looked at her piercingly, minting every word. "My son has a father and your Sam has nothing to do with his birth." Julia tried to object, but he came to see you several times. "How did you just move in with the woman of faith?" "That's right, but I'm not the one who treated your husband." "How can you blindly believe rumors like that? You're an educated woman and it's not hard to calculate. When I moved here and when I had Zach, it didn't prove anything." Now doctors are nursing premature babies, Molly impatiently interrupted Julia. "My son was born overweight, so all your suspicions are unfounded." Chasing Lucy and other gossip. "Okay, Julia, I don't have time for this." But Jones wasn't going to leave. "Show me your boy, I want to make sure." This demand angered the young mother. "This isn't a circus or a museum to show off. My child is sick, and I'm not going to disturb him. Go home, Julia. Don't make me go to extreme measures." Jones reluctantly headed for the entrance. She turned around several times before leaving the stranger's yard. Molly noticed the woman's bloodless lips moving. She thought regretfully, "It must be clinging to me. And why are people willing to believe any word spoken? Why won't they trust the voice of reason?" After the bread drink, Zach felt better and fell asleep. Molly sat beside the crib, her son immersed in his thoughts. "My little boy, how like your father are you? But I don't want you to turn out to be a scoundrel like him." Molly's marital bliss lasted only 2 months. After their modest wedding with Martin unexpectedly died Lola, and her husband's mother drastically changed her attitude to the young daughter-in-law Lisa. She didn't hesitate to air her grievances with the girl. "It's your fault. Did not save my mommy from death. Left a soothsayer. You're a liar, not a healer." The woman usually made such accusations when Martin wasn't at home. She was afraid of her son's reaction and tried to keep her emotions in check. But everything changed after Martin went on a long business trip. Before he left, he reassured his young wife, Molly. "I'll be gone for a month or 2. Our company is opening a branch in the Sverdlovsk region, and my team will have to provide the technical part. But we have all experienced specialists who are real pros, so we'll manage." In a minimum of time, the young woman had a bad feeling and asked her husband, Martin, "Can't you stay? My heart is troubled. He hugged her affectionately. "Don't fill your head with bad thoughts. We'll be fine, and you can call me anytime." "I will. I'll take you at your word. I'll bore you with my calls every day." The very next day, she dialed her husband's number, but he didn't answer. For a whole week, the young woman tried to contact Martin, but heard only the soulless voice of the answering machine. "Call her out. Call back later." Then she was told that such a number did not exist at all. She could only hope that Martin would call her himself. But as the days went by, her cell phone gave no sign of life except total incomprehension. What had happened to Martin? Worrying was her mother-in-law's attitude. She became irritable and rebuked her daughter-in-law for the slightest misstep. Subsequently, Martin's mother began to ignore her daughter-in-law's presence. As soon as Molly showed up in the kitchen, Lisa would defiantly leave, emphasizing with her behavior that she did not want to talk to her. This went on for about a week. Molly sensed that a storm was brewing, and she wasn't wrong. One evening, Lisa didn't come home in an agitated state, and from the doorstep began to shout, "Molly, where are you? Come here. There is a serious conversation." The girl had to obey her mother-in-law's demand. She went out into the hallway and immediately smelled the odor of booze. This fact shocked the girl, because Lisa was very careful about her health. She always refused wine, even on holidays. Noticing that the daughter-in-law wrinkled Mother Martin, critically remarked that she did not like it. "I don't like a lot of things either, but I have to put up with it. For example, your presence in this house pisses me off. Tell me how long you're going to sit here waiting for who knows what." "Lisa, why are you doing this?" "I'm waiting for Martin. He's my lawfully wedded husband." The woman burst out laughing. "He had a platoon of wives like that before him. Do you really believe in fairy tales? My son is not your type. That's not the kind of wife he wants. Let him decide what kind of wife he wants." The mother-in-law came so close that the girl felt her breath on her face. "Listen to me, beautiful. Has it not yet reached your native brains that Martin regrets his hasty wife, and that's why he doesn't answer you? By the way, he called me the day before yesterday. Told me he's gonna be delayed another month." Molly held her breath. "Lisa, he asked about me." "He did. He wondered if you moved out of this apartment yet. I'd really like to hear the answer to that question too, because your presence in this house really annoys me. What are you here for, anyway? Your services are not needed. And if you're going to live on someone else's dime, that's not gonna work. So find an apartment. And the sooner you do it, the better. I'll even give you some money. Given your hopeless situation, go to your relatives. After all, you have aunties and grandmothers." Lisa took out 2 bills of the highest denomination. "I hope you and I understand each other." There was a hammer pounding in her head, and the sound made her very dizzy. Molly began to hastily gather her things. Before her eyes flashed the face of her mother-in-law, distorted with hatred, and in her ears those nasty dots. Her words sounded, "Look for an apartment. That's not the kind of wife my son needs." Martin called to me, smearing tears and despair on her cheeks. A young woman whispered to her, "He called me because he was afraid, and I was such a naive fool. I wanted to make them happy with the news that we were having a baby." Molly had only recently found out she was pregnant, but she had been hesitant to tell her mother-in-law. "It's okay. I'll be fine on my own. We don't need anyone." In that critical situation, she felt for the first time united with her unborn child. Trying not to make any noise, she left her husband's apartment and headed for the train station. She already knew that she would buy a ticket to Native Village. Wendy wouldn't chase me away. I have nowhere else to go. Just the day after Molly arrived at the village across the creek, news spread throughout the neighborhood that a distant relative had settled in. Wendy treated people with herbs, but she selected the formulas based solely on the complaints of visitors. The old lady's granddaughter had different diagnostic methods. Molly could identify a diseased organ with a touch of her hand. Over time, she learned to control her unique abilities and the accuracy of her diagnosis. Amazed even medics, who sometimes turned to her for help. But the popularity of the young witch doctor did not many became across the throat. Questionable activities of a young woman attracted the attention and representatives of law enforcement. One day, Molly visited the district police officer and advised you to get a job, because people are different. They say I have no complaints against you. Live as you like, but I have to respond to complaints. Go to the poultry farm. There's always a shortage of labor there. Molly thanked the district officer for his advice and was soon on the payroll. While Wendy was alive, she worked in shifts. But after the death of a relative, the question of where to put the child came up. And here again, kind people helped. The company allocated a place in a kindergarten for a single mom. It remained only to rejoice in life. Envious, ill-wishers have already hatched a plan of revenge, strangers who dared to break the established order in their promised corner. No sooner had Julia Jones left the house. The healer, as she noticed not in the distance painfully familiar male figure out of rage. The woman whispered, "Oh, you ghastly," to this Vedi poured, "but nothing, I'll arrange you." Love comforts together will be on a hot griddle tumbling, trying not to give away his presence. My jealousy is unbearable. Woman sneaked into her house. The children rushed to her with questions. "Mom, where have you been? Dad came to ask for you, and we don't know what to say." Julia automatically asked her daughter, "And where is Daddy now?" "Where is he?" "He went to work. He just left without waiting for you. His car broke down. It needs to be repaired. I made him some sandwiches because Daddy said he'd be late." The woman listened to her daughter, and in her head a plan of revenge was already brewing. She muttered, "It's a good thing Daddy will be back late." The daughter looked at her mother in surprise. "Mom, you seem strange today. You're scolding Daddy for being in the workshops all day, but you're saying it's a good thing." Julia whispered at her daughter and went about her chores. She could hardly wait until evening when it was quite dark. The woman slipped out of the house. She brought her bag with her, which she tried to carry very carefully. She stepped carefully past the Negros houses and disappeared into the night. All day long, Molly had not gotten the visits of Julia Jones out of her mind either. "I still don't understand why that woman came. And she was behaving strangely. Can jealousy turn a mother of two into such a hunted creature? It's just an unsubstantiated rumor. I've only seen that Sam a few times, and that was in public after dinner. A woman was about to do laundry, but the old lady next door came in. 'Molly, baby, look at my leg. You've got eyes like x-rays.' The old woman was leaning on a crooked branch and barely had a ferret, so she sat her down on a stool. 'And where did you get it?' The old woman began to wail. She's getting old. Her eyes are failing. She was doing her chores at home. Dana hit a corner. It hurts like hell. I wish it wasn't broken. I'd be dead." Kelly, like many old people in the village, had no relatives. Well, they had relatives, but they lived far away. Therefore, any illness, or even a minor injury for such people seemed a disaster. The healer tried to calm the grandmother. "You still live to 100 years. You don't have a fracture, but you were wrong. I'm going to give you a little treatment." Molly took a jar of herbal ointment out of the cupboard and applied the composition liberally to the bruised long areas. Then she put a bandage on her leg. "That's it. You'll feel better soon." Kelly began to thank the woman. "You have a good heart to help people. God bless you." The old woman took a jar of ointment and, leaning on a stick, headed for the entrance. "Kelly, let me walk you out." Molly drove her patient almost to the house and then returned. Until late in the afternoon, she did her housework. The uneasiness that had appeared in the afternoon did not go away. This unpleasant feeling only grew stronger by the minute. And the woman tried to understand the reason for its appearance, but her thoughts each time returned to the morning incident. She put Zach to bed and was about to go to bed herself. Suddenly, the image of her mother appeared very clearly before her eyes. "Don't sleep, daughter. You can't sleep." Molly ran her hands over her face, as if trying to remove the obsession, but it didn't help. Then the woman went to the window. She wanted to open the window a little to let in some fresh air, but at that moment, a column of flame erupted from the side. Not yet realizing what had happened, the young woman rushed to the crib. She managed to jump out into the street when Baba Faith's flimsy house was completely engulfed in flames. Zach cradled her mother's skinny body. "Mommy, I'm scared." "Don't be afraid, son, I'm with you." Instead of fire people ran away, but mostly it was old people who couldn't help. When the firemen arrived, the home village was just a smoking ruin. Molly stood at a loss, not knowing what to do. Elderly Gawkers had already managed to scatter to their homes, and no one cared about the young mother with a baby in her arms. She tucked her son into the blanket and wandered off to meet the dispersing. Mused dawned. Jacob disliked night duty to the point of toothache, but he disliked middle-of-the-night calls even more. This night he wasn't destined to enjoy pleasant visions either. Because in the morning, the phone was ringing off the hook. It was the duty nurse from the emergency room. "Jacob, urgently need your consultation." Jacob grumbled unhappily. "Is something burning?" "You couldn't wait until morning." The girl grinned. "There was a fire today, but not at our place. Someone's house burned down across the river, but there were no casualties. Who'd want to come in the middle of the night? A woman from around here. It's a bad situation with her arm." "All right, I'll be right there. Get a small or ready just in case." "I'm all set." I could hear a woman crying on the phone. Jacob said in his heart, "They take it to the extreme and then they cry. What kind of people?" The man quickly dressed and jumped outside. The morning fog completely enveloped the small town. The sight was stunning, but Jacob had no time to admire the beautiful scenery. Duty was calling him. He hurried towards the hospital, not expecting to meet anyone on the deserted street. Suddenly he noticed in the square near the hospital an incomprehensible movement. At first, Jacob wanted to run past this suspicious object, but heard a child crying. The man thought with irritation that people can't sleep. They're dragging children with them. He came closer and only then realized that the object of his concern was a young woman with a baby in her arms. Jacob asked if you were in trouble. The voice replied yes. "Our house burned down and my son and I are now left on the street." Jacob remembered the conversation with the nurse from the emergency room. "So you're the burned out people from across the river? Do you have any acquaintances or relatives?" "No one, and everything burned down." "I didn't even have time to bring my papers." "What am I going to do with you?" "I don't have time to arrange anything for you." The man thought for a second, but then he exclaimed happily, "I don't know your name. Sweet young lady, but here's a solution to your problem. I'll give you the keys to the house where I live. It's not far from here, near the store. You'll wait for me. Then we'll figure out what to do together. Unfortunately, I can't spare your time right now because I'm in a hurry to go to surgery." Jacob gave the young woman the keys and headed toward the hospital. Lucy sat on the couch in the emergency room and rocked her growing arm like a child. The woman's condition was worsening by the hour, and the swelling had spread all the way to her shoulder. Lucy was crying her eyes out. "Why didn't I listen? She told me the day before yesterday to run to the hospital, and I didn't listen. Now I'm gonna die." In the prime of life, Jacob heard the last words of the woman and cheerfully said, "Do not even dream. We will not let you die. We will save you now." Lucy tried to rise from the couch, but the wild pain nailed her to the seat. "I'm not the one who can't stand my hanging cats anymore. You're the one who's going to cut my arm." Jacob patted the woman on the shoulder. "We'll look at your arm first and then decide what to do. Cutting something off isn't a problem, so we'll figure out how to avoid losing it. Hey guys, help a woman to the dressing room." This request was addressed to the duty shift of the emergency room. A young nurse together with an orderly picked up Lucy from both sides, and the patient began to wail even louder. "Why didn't I listen? She warned me." Jacob inquired, "You're always talking about some kind of witch doctor. If I understand you correctly, you have been treated with folk methods before." "No doctor didn't. I had that damn splinter in me over 2 weeks ago. Everything was fine. And then my palm started to swell up and I couldn't save it. I went to a witch doctor across the river. She lives as a nurse," interrupted a patient. "Jenya has a house. Balky Faith this night burned down." Lucy, the palm of her healthy hand covered her mouth. "My mother is a woman." Apparently put down the young witch doctor. "Jacob is already a little accustomed to the local lingo, and you have suspicions about it?" Lucy shook his head. "Maybe I do, but I won't." "Why are you slandering people for nothing?" The nurse noticed. "You be right. I have never believed in all sorts of things, and I have never gone to a witch doctor. It's safer and safer to go to a certified specialist. Jacob looked at the girl carefully. You're wrong. You can't deny the possibility of unconventional practices. I too, in my youth, I thought all this quackery. But then myself got into trouble and saved me a local uncle with a tambourine Jacob and removed from the hand Lucy and bandage and shook his head. Oh, you got your arm all messed up. We'll have to operate. Having calmed down, it was. Lucy started wailing loudly again. Doctor, I can't bear the pain. I assure you, you won't even feel it, because we'll give you an injection. Within an hour, the operation was over. Am I alive, or am I dreaming? Jacob was cheering up the patient. It's okay, and you're still on the ground. But you're going to have to stay with us for a few days because there could be complications. We're treating you. Then you'll go home, a promise that soothed the pain-stricken woman. I'd do anything to save my arm. The nurse on duty began to register the patient for inpatient treatment. Jacob looked at his watch. Wow, it's 8:30. Time to go to work. The surgeon was already heading to his department, but suddenly remembered about the girl who had the keys to the house. He asked the nurse, "If you don't mind, tell mine that I'll be a little late for half an hour, no more." Of course, Jacob will run home. Have some tea after such a restless night. It is not a sin to rest. Jacob hurried home because he didn't like to be late for work. He didn't consider night duty an excuse and hoped to be home in time for the general hospital meeting. The door of the house was open, and the man, trying not to make any noise, made his way into the large room. His guests were asleep on the couch, and he was able to get a good look at their facial features. A young woman suddenly gleamed something, and the man shifted his gaze to the nightstand and was stunned. He saw the woman's jewelry, a small pendant in the form of a locket. There was no way this thing was in this girl's possession. Jacob touched the young woman's hand, and Molly opened her eyes with difficulty. I'm sorry, I didn't realize I'd fallen asleep. The man had already completely mastered himself, and I just want to ask you one question. Tell me, where did you get this pendant? The girl said sadly, it was my mother's jewelry. It's the only thing I have in memory of her. Jacob felt his mouth dry with excitement in his voice. He asked your mom's name by chance, Betty. The girl fluttered her eyelashes in surprise. Yes, Edward's Betty. He couldn't hold back his emotions any longer. Edwards. So it was you. So she tricked me then. But why? Molly looked fearfully at the man, who had his arms wrapped around his head in despair. She did not understand anything, but was afraid to question this man. Terrible fear for herself and her son again. Sticky paws touched her heart. Perhaps we better leave. Molly began to wake her son. Zach, wake up, sweetheart. Jacob sank down on the couch without strength. Don't you have to leave? My daughter, stay here. This is your home now. I have so much to tell you, but I have to get my thoughts together. Jacob had completely forgotten his duty as a doctor. He sat on the couch and could not take his eyes off the night guest who had come into his life so unexpectedly. Zach looked at the adults and didn't understand what was happening to them. He looked at his mother, then at the owner of the house. You're my grandfather. The stupor fell away. And Jacob confidently answered, yes, little boy. He cradled the boy against him and clutched him. Eyes too stingy male tears rolled down his cheeks. But Jacob was not embarrassed by these tears because they were tears of happiness. Episodes from the past often surfaced in Jacob's mind. But for more than a quarter of a century, he had diligently banished them. Once he had already drawn the final line beyond which his past remained, and he never wanted to go back there again. But the appearance of a young witch doctor with a baby made the man change his principles, and for the first time in many years he allowed himself to return to the place where his youthful dreams and first love remained. With William Edwards. They had been friends since first grade, and this friendship was approved by both boys' parents and teachers. Because Jacob possessed the qualities of a leader, and William tried to imitate him in everything, so their relationship often resembled a competition. But until the time of endless dueling did not tolerate serious disagreements. Only sometimes William would wistfully remark, Jacob, you're a real lucky man. No matter how hard I try, I can't do it. His comrade answered him everything, because you try to repeat after others, showing your individual qualities, and immediately feel different. Jacob tried to follow his friend's advice, but he still did not succeed. Around the 9th grade, he decided to succeed in another way. He started spreading rumors about him behind his friend's back. When Jacob realized who was the source of the gossip, he gave his friend his first warning. "Look, William, this is not manly. If it happens again, you can forget you have a friend." Edwards was quiet for a while, but jealousy lurked beneath the boy's heart. Despite the fact that relations between friends cooled a little, William also applied to medical school. Surprisingly, but both guys got in at the first go. Jacob took the event with reserve. Edwards, on the other hand, was triumphant. "You and I are destined to be together for life. I can already imagine how you and I will become surgeons and work in a good clinic." Jacob decided to tease his comrade, but district hospitals are not a prospect for an aspiring doctor. "Edwards, I don't get it." Jokes waved 2 hands, did not get burned at once. "This is definitely not for me. My daddy won't let his only son miss out somewhere in the middle of nowhere." Jacob, in a constructive tone, said a real doctor must go through all the stages of formation. Only then can he become a true professional. Although William disagreed, he did not argue with his comrade. The silent man swallowed his resentment when Jacob, not him, had been elected the head of the group at the general meeting. The appearance of a favorite girl in the life of a friend's friend was the most stressful for the jealous. Betty was getting a lot of attention from a lot of guys, but she only let herself be courted by Jacob. William secretly suffered because he also liked this girl. After Jacob started dating Betty, and Jacob was basically left out. Then he remembered the old and already personally proven method of gossip. But having learned from bitter experience, the boy was now acting smarter. He acted very carefully and mostly through third parties. Therefore, it was almost impossible to identify the source. Thanks to the efforts of William at the university, spread rumors that Jacob likes to drink and booze. Such behavior of the university administration could not leave without attention. Jacob was summoned to the dean's office and reprimanded in full form. He was given a warning. "Keep in mind, Jacob, one more such signal, and you can take away your documents." No matter how much the guy tried to slander, to justify himself, no one wanted to listen to him. Although he guessed who was the culprit of his troubles, there was no proof. In order to completely eliminate problems in the future, Jacob terminated all relations with Edwards. He even rented a room so that he wouldn't have to face the envious students in the dormitory. But William was not deterred. He decided to come in from the other flank, namely to make his accomplices and his friend's girlfriend. But Betty quickly figured him out. "Look, William, you've got the wrong girl. I'm used to believing only the facts, so you're not going to get away with this. Don't waste your time. Do something useful. Take up ballroom dancing or go to the library." No girl had ever humiliated William in such a way, but the narcissistic young man didn't know how to take revenge on those who made him suffer. The opportunity came unexpectedly, approached the end of studies, and every future medic made plans for life. Before receiving their diplomas, the graduates were offered a little work in the organization of the Red Cross. The first to sign up was Edwards. He excitedly told his classmates about the prospects of participating in the mission. "Guys, this is a great launching pad." The knowledgeable person assured me that later all participants would be given special certificates. And in general, to visit abroad for free. It's the limit of dreams. Many alumni took the bait. Jacob was one of them. Only he had a very different agenda. He thought the peacekeeping mission would give him a chance to gain useful experience as an aspiring surgeon. When Betty found out Jacob was going to Africa, she was shocked. "Jacob, do you realize how serious this is? It's very dangerous. Boyfriend to girlfriend. He won't send us somewhere too hot. I've already found out our group is going to one of the poorest countries. We'll take vaccines and necessary medical supplies there to provide medical care to the people. As soon as I get back, you and I will definitely cut the wedding short." "Why didn't you tell me before? I would have gone with you too. There's nothing for girls to do there. So there's still danger, and you're lying to me." "Betty, you know there's danger everywhere. Even crossing the road is scary because not everyone follows the rules. There were 17 people in their group, and they put Edwards in charge. This was William's finest hour. He gave out commands left and right, which caused laughter and obscene jokes. Upon arrival at their destination, the future doctors immediately began to work Jacob, and 2 other guys were sent to remote settlements. But they did not reach the place. On the way to the settlement, they were ambushed. 1 guy was killed, and Jacob was seriously wounded. All the valuable cargo was taken by local bandits. They also tied up the 3rd boy and took him with them. Scraps of their conversations, Jacob realized that the bandits were going to get a ransom for the prisoner. That terrible day he remembered for the rest of his life. He was bleeding on the road with no hope of rescue. Gathering his last strength, Jacob gave himself first aid, which helped to stop the bleeding. After that, he lost consciousness. He woke up in a dwelling resembling a tent. People were discussing quietly and pointing at him. Soon a short man in brightly colored rags jumped up. He began to examine Jacob's wound and at the same time loudly faltered his tongue. The boy realized that his affairs were not good at all. After examining the local shaman, Jacob ate some potions, and he fell into unconsciousness. He lost track of the days, so he did not know how much time had passed since his disappearance. When he became quite well, 2 men from the tribe put him on some kind of battery and took him to the nearest town. There he learned that he had been a guest of the local tribe for 3 whole months. He was also told that he had been presumed dead for all those months. It was a real shock. Jacob was afraid to even imagine the upcoming meeting with his fiancée. But everything turned out to be obscenely trivial. Betty did not faint, but only slightly pale. And then the most amazing thing happened. His fiancée was not happy, but on the contrary, began to reproach him that he had not found a way to inform her that he was alive and well. "And I believed you, and you turned out to be like this." She didn't get a chance to say who he really was, because the final scene was the appearance of William Edwards. Jacob pulled his eyes out. "What are you doing here?" William gave him a friendly pat on the shoulder. "I'm glad you're alive. Honestly, very glad. But sorry, old boy, things have changed while you've been traveling in Africa. Betty and I got married last week. It was a beautiful wedding. Too bad you didn't get a chance to have any fun." Jacob didn't remember how he got to the apartment he and Betty had rented before the upcoming wedding. His thoughts were all jumbled up in his head, and at that moment, he wanted more than anything to drink himself into unconsciousness. The only person who was willing to give him a shoulder to lean on was Andrew. "Hang in there, Jacob. You are a man and must be ready for any trials." The next day, Jacob left town, where his first love and his dashed hopes for happiness remained. Molly looked at the man who was telling her such incredible things. "I gave this pendant to your mother after our first serious, if I may say so, meeting. The only thing I don't understand is, why didn't she tell me?" Molly shook her head. "What makes you so sure I'm not William's daughter?" Jacob found the strength to laugh. "I'll show you one picture now, and you'll understand everything yourself." He put Zach, who had already climbed into his lap, on the floor and opened the closet. He searched for something for a long time, finally handed her the picture. Zach looked in and smiled. "You poked your finger and said, 'That's me, Mom,' when we took the picture. And that's the jacket I don't remember." Molly was afraid to believe it. She could feel the tears coming out of her eyes. "So we are not alone in this world, that we have someone else." Jacob smiled. "Not just anyone, my father and grandfather. By the way, quite a successful surgeon at your hospital." Molly looked at him confused. "What are we all going to do now?" Jacob looked at his watch. "So that's how I'm going to work. I'm sorry to leave you, but now we'll definitely have time to talk. Then I'll take some time off, and we'll be sure to get back to the paperwork and the fire investigation. Anything you can find here is at your disposal. You don't miss me, do you? I'll try to get out in time." He moved toward the door, then stopped, smiled. "I have a very strange feeling right now. I'm basically all alone in this world already, and now I have a family. It's so unusual, so strange, but very joyful." Jacob came out Molly, spinning around the house and holding Zach in her arms. "Zach, we have a daddy, and you have a grandfather. You know, he didn't leave anyone behind. It was all this one." Molly furrowed her brow. She already knew that William's new wife had been hit by a car, and now her ex-father was grooming a new woman. But nothing. As long as the rope didn't twist. That voice forced. Molly grinned. Her mom had never fooled her. By some coincidence. In the afternoon, the chief of the local police department had been admitted with a trivial appendicitis. He kept wiping sweat from his forehead. Jacob asked, "Why are you so nervous?" "By virtue of your profession, it seems to me that you have come face to face with criminals more than once." The man grinned unhappily. "Jacob, I know what to expect from a criminal. I can anticipate what's going to happen. But I'll be sleeping here, if I understand correctly. So I won't be able to influence the course of events." Jacob looked at him with interest. "That's an interesting point of view, but you can't be so distrustful of those around you. Maybe that's what I learned there." Jacob immediately understood what the man was talking about. "But if you have more trust." "I was there too, but not for long. Our supply train was ambushed. One doctor was killed. I was badly wounded, so the bandits assumed I was dead. But they took one young doctor kid with them. I guess they wanted a ransom. I never found out anything about him. They just told me not to go where I didn't want to go." The chief of police held out his hand. "Leo, believe it or not. But I feel a lot better now. I trust you." The operation went quickly and without complications. 2 hours later, Leo woke up in his room. His consciousness was still hazy, but he could hear someone talking not far from him. "Leo, the jokes are over. You were saved this time, but the next ones might not make it. Leo's in the room with you now. As soon as he feels better, I'll be sure to ask him to send you for treatment." "What are you talking about? I'm not an alcoholic. I'm a free man." At the same second, there was a slap, and a man's voice said, "Oh, I'm Leo. I'm telling you quite seriously." Leo grinned to himself. Wow, they're already scaring grown men with it. When breathing became easier, and he could even get out of bed, Leo called his old friend. "I have a case. Remember that medical supply wagon that was ambushed? A man from that convoy operated on me yesterday. I realize that the case is long closed, but I remember you talking about wanting to dig privately." The police chief listened for about 5 minutes, then nodded his head. "It's a deal. Call me to meet you." Jacob first wanted to run home, but then realized that you cannot come empty-handed to his grandson, or his daughter either. This is all so unusual. Grandson, daughter. Even the language. Even his brain was cautiously saying these words, as if afraid that everything would turn out to be untrue. He drove to the largest mall in the city. Jacob quietly opened the door of the house. Who knows, maybe Zach is asleep. But no, Zach was not only awake. He seemed to be waiting for him, because he immediately rushed over to him. Jacob threw all the bags on the floor and picked up his grandson, who clung to him trustingly. Molly looked around at the purchases. "Oh, did you guys clean out the store? Let's make a deal. No kick out. I realize it's hard for you to call me Dad right away, but I hope that moment will come someday." Molly nodded her head in embarrassment. "I'll try." Jacob set Zach on the floor and commanded, "Let's take it apart. I hope I got the dimensions right." Molly shook her head. "Dinner first. Everything else later." Zach had eaten everything the fastest and was now looking longingly at the brightly colored box that peeked out from the pile of bags. There was obviously something very interesting in there, and obviously for him. Molly smiled as she looked at her son. She understood what he was going through. "Thank you, Molly. I can't remember the last time I had anything other than sandwiches and wheat when I got home from work." "Well, now it's on." Jacob sat on the couch and watched Zach's already calm demeanor. The big machine. The kid's eyes were burning. He hadn't parted with it all evening and then into bed. Molly had barely taken the machine out of his hands when he was already asleep. Jacob was drinking coffee, waiting for his daughter. They had so much to discuss. Molly had just entered the room when there was a knock on the door. Jacob wondered what it was like to be brought in at this hour. He usually got a call from the hospital. Standing on the doorstep was a grim Sam Jones. Molly immediately frowned. Why did he come to apologize? "You fool, she told me everything. She's crying to me. She's afraid that she'll go to jail, but she won't. Molly turned away, signaling that the conversation was over. But Sam wasn't going to leave. He sat down on a chair and spoke. I don't know how I'm going to live my life, and my jealousy. I would have left a long time ago, but this way she'll take it out on the kids. Molly turned to him. Is it your fault she's so jealous of you? Sam raised his head at her. But I didn't do anything wrong. Yes, you did. You just don't notice it. But she does, and she sees that you're worse off at home than you are at work. Think about what I said if you want to keep your family together. Sam sat for another 5 minutes, then got up, put a thick wad of money on the table. Molly, no offense to you. I realize you can't buy a house with this money, but you're all out of stuff. Sam left, and Jacob looked at his daughter in surprise. And I don't understand everything now. Did he set your house on fire? No. His wife is our village gossip. So we should go to the police. No need to go to the police. She's already punished herself. It's not her fault. She's just stupid and listens to nonsense. Jacob shook his head. You are just like your mother, always for justice, for good justice. Tell me how you ended up in the village. It's a long story of a lifetime. Molly poured herself some tea and sat down in front of her father. They talked half the night. Jacob was indignant several times and said he should be nailed. First it was William and then Martin. Looking at his watch, Jacob said 2 hours and go to bed. I'll stay up a little longer. He went outside, breathing in more air. If things hadn't worked out this way then and now things would be different. Leo, having learned what problems Jacob has in the family, immediately said today go to the office. They will take care of your documents. I'll call. Everything will be done quickly, in a week. Molly looked at the new passport with a smile. Well, it's a thing to celebrate. I have to work tomorrow. I'm out of vacation time. Molly began to set the table. But then there was a knock at the door. Yes, come in. On the doorstep stood a strange man a little older than Jacob. There was something about the man's gaze that was so forgotten yet familiar. Good evening. I'm sorry to bother you. I'm a friend of Leo's. I very much like to talk to you, Jacob. Well, come in. No, if you don't mind, let's go for a walk. Your daughter doesn't need to hear our conversation. Jacob looked at Molly confused, but put on his jacket. They got out and walked to the river. The thing is, the guy who was taken prisoner is a very good friend of mine. You know, there were so many investigations, but nobody dug up anything. I'm retired from the force, but now I'm in private practice, and I can afford to get back into the business when Jacob came back. Molly looked at him questioningly. He only said that. It's about our service. And William, he was there too, wasn't he? But to be honest, I was hurt right away. I was treated by a shaman for a long time, so I don't really know anything. And I don't want to. I'm gonna have to go back to those times again. I feel it. The next day, Molly and Zach went to the local store. As luck would have it, Lucy was in the store at the time. Zach, as soon as he saw her, clung to his mother. And Lucy, who was just about to leave, dropped her bag on the floor. Oh, who's come to the store? Not like for food. What about frogs, whose legs and all? She laughed at her own joke. Molly let go of her son's hand and moved in on her. Why do you have so much venom in you? Don't you realize you're poisoning yourself with it? Julia's been spilling all kinds of shit. And now she's going to jail. And if we were asleep, what sin would be on your soul? Lucy retreated fearfully. What are you waiting for? That I didn't do anything. In fact, I can say what I want to say, and who to believe and what to do is everyone's business. Lucy picked up her bag and headed for the door. Molly just said, "Are you watching what you say? You're sick with anger and venom." Lucy jumped outside, and already from there her threats and curses were heard. Molly smiled sweetly and turned to the saleswoman. Now Molly felt neither fear nor loneliness. She directly physically felt that she had protection behind her. Her father. The clerk looked at Molly fearfully. Their store was on the outskirts of town. You could say it was the end of the town, so everyone knew each other. She'd heard about Molly, too. That evening, her father said to Molly, "I need to go to my hometown. Would you like to buy something?" Molly thought it would be a good idea to go out. Zach had prepared for the trip extensively. Molly and Jacob almost died laughing. When you saw the backpack he packed, no, Zach, that's no good. We can't take that much stuff for him. Zach's right behind the sniffles. But I need all this stuff. Jacob sat down in front of him. Well, then we won't be able to buy you anything because we'll have nowhere to put it. The boy thought for a moment, then quickly began to free his backpack. At the train station, they were met by the same man who had once come to them. Jacob, I will say at once that your story helped me a lot. Some facts became a real missing link. Unfortunately, a friend of mine was killed when he was captured and ransomed. He escaped, but he died in the escape. Now we know who it was that set the enemies upon your wagon. Jacob stretched thoughtfully. So I thought they were waiting for us there for a reason. No, not for nothing. This is a man you know well. And Jacob stared at the man in surprise. You are. This is your boyhood friend, William Edwards. No, it can't be. Yes, he's not a very nice man, but what would it be? There was a lot of money at stake. Jacob. I realized that now the puzzle is finally coming together. And if it was William, then everything was falling into place. An hour later, they were leaving the investigative committee, where Jacob and William had a confrontation. William was crying tears, apologizing to Jacob and Molly. The man caught up with them on the street, handed Molly the keys. Take these keys to the apartment. Are you still registered there? He won't need them for the next 10 years. They were silent for a while. Then Jacob decisively said, let's go to a cafe or a restaurant. We should celebrate. They sat down at a table by the window. Molly smiled because Zach was asking 1,000 questions. Why here? As in a fairy tale. Molly. The young woman flinched, looked up, and saw Martin. Zach immediately felt his mother tense up, pressed himself against her and froze, looking at the stranger. Martin looked at his wife with surprise. Of course, the formerly beloved wife. Strange, had she then exchanged him for this man who was old enough to be her father? And this child, judging by its age, she'd gotten pregnant as soon as she'd run away from him. Martin was still grateful to his mother for being able to open his eyes. True, he hadn't married again yet, despite his mother's best efforts. Hello, Martin. She wanted to hide so she wouldn't see the traitor's face. She didn't know or understand how she felt about this man, but she knew she didn't want to see him. How are you doing, Molly? Martin looked mockingly at Jacob. I guess that's what happiness is to you. I am happy, Martin. I hope you're not suffering in your happy life, too. What kind of hypocrites are you? I believe you were pure, that you love me? Molly raised her eyebrows in surprise. Then she stood up. You're the one calling me, you hypocrite. You've gone off to have fun. You couldn't even tell me yourself that you were fed up with me and asked your mother to kick me out. And then you call me a hypocrite. Martin even took a step back under Molly's pressure. Kicked you out where? What are you talking about? You just decided to justify yourself. She turned around and sat back down. Martin wanted to say something else, but Jacob stood in front of him, a young man. Would you please leave us? My daughter doesn't want to talk to you, and my grandson is afraid of you. Martin cast one last glance at Lisa and quickly moved toward the exit. Now he wanted to get to his mother and ask some questions. Molly was silent for a long time, then raised her eyes to Jacob. He asked, I take it that this is Zach's father. Yes, Dad. I've seen his face somewhere, but I can't remember. He's a biochemist. He seems pretty good. Maybe even accomplished something. Jacob slapped himself on the forehead. That's right. I read his article. I thought he was very knowledgeable. Meanwhile, Martin was carrying everything back to his mother after Molly left him. He came back and moved out on Mom. True, she was adamantly opposed to it, but that didn't bother him much. He'd rather have her bothering him about nothing. But it was unbearable to live with her. Mom. Lisa came out of the room. Martin, why are you screaming like a victim? Mom, we need to talk. What we need to talk about. What could be so important? That you went to visit your mother and saw Molly. The woman shuddered, then quite indifferently said, I'm glad, and I had nothing to do with it. Mother, tell me how Molly left me. And who she left with. Lisa jerked her shoulder. God, I've got nothing better to do. Only how to keep in your head such nonsense will you run. Martin stood in front of his mother. "Mom, the jokes are over. I saw Molly, I saw her son, who could be my age. She doesn't have a wedding ring, she doesn't look like a walking woman. Which makes me think you have something to tell me." Lisa. Somehow she looked at her son at once. She had never seen him in such a state. Jacob and his family returned home in the late afternoon. The day had been so full that Zach had long since fallen asleep in his grandfather's arms. "Molly, you go to bed. I'm on duty tomorrow too." "Yes, Dad, you go. I'll do all the work here myself." Molly looked at the shopping pile. Zach's grandfather's budget had been shaken up pretty badly today. He didn't ask for anything, by the way, just stared with huge eyes at anything. And Grandpa's already running out to buy it. It's time to go back to work at the daycare center. There was a quiet knock on the window. Molly looked out and saw Julia, the same one who had set her house on fire. Sighing, she threw on her sweater and went outside. Julia immediately threw herself at her feet. "Molly, I'm so sorry. I don't know how it all happened. As if someone was pushing me. I've done something that I don't know how to live." Sam is embarrassing to look at in front of the kids. "Calm down, you're rereading. No one died at the funeral. And that's already good." Julia sat down on the step. "How to live? How to live now?" Molly sat down next to her, usually to live. "Forget everything that happened and start over." "Start how?" "Yeah, Sam won't forgive me. And neither will you. I forgave you a long time ago. I'm grateful in some ways. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have found my father." Julia looked at her in amazement. "The new surgeon is your father?" Yes, Molly was well aware that tomorrow the whole small town would know about it. But she decided to go with it. They'd find out sooner or later anyway, so let it be sooner so there would be less gossip. Molly turned around. Sam was standing at the door. Julia jumped up. "Sam, what are you doing here?" He looked at his wife gloomily. "What are you doing here?" "I came to apologize." Sam's voice softened a little. He came in, sat down on the porch. "I bought a trip to the sea. In 3 days we'll go as a family." Julia froze. Molly smiled. She had underestimated Sam. He appeared to have hurt her. Sam at sea altogether. They walked tightly holding hands. Molly sat still for a long time, looking up at the sky and smiling. 3 days later, the village was shaken by the news Leo Alcax failed Chagall. While in the hospital, there was nothing to do. Asked his wife to bring from home something he had left from art, and all days long he painted. When the picture was ready, it was seen by one of the patients, who immediately offered Leo to write more paintings for a real exhibition. Leo, telling everyone, said that he no longer drank because great things awaited him. "Jacob, you have a visitor. Is the visitor not a patient?" "No, he doesn't look like a patient. But let him come into the office." Martin came in. He didn't look as great as he did in the cafe. Jacob immediately pressed his lips together, stood up, then obliged. Martin looked at him. "And I came to you for help." "I really need your help. What makes you think I'm going to help you?" "Because I don't know why. Maybe because you broke up with Molly's mother for some reason." "Jacob, I don't know why the exchange of belligerent fervor went away. Have a seat now that you're here. I'm listening to Martin. I couldn't start for a long time. Then he started talking. He spoke without any emotion, just laying out one by one the facts he had learned from his mother. By the end of the story, Jacob understood perfectly well that in front of him sat the same victim of deception as he himself had once become. "Martin, even if I agree to help you, there is no guarantee that Molly will forgive you. You realize she's out on the street with no money, no place to live, pregnant." Martin looked up at Jacob. "I mean, I'm right, Zach. My son is yours, of course. Who else would it be? Help me. Just one thing. I need Molly to listen to me." Molly stuffed and dialed the windows. The door slammed and she turned around and froze. It was her father, and behind him stood Martin. What the hell? What was he doing here? Jacob raised his hand. "Molly, we haven't been in contact with you that long, of course. But you know I don't want to hurt you. I'm just asking you to listen to Martin. Then, after you've listened, you can chase him away, even beat him up. Do you think he has something interesting to say, Another incredible story to tell. Or are moms more inclined to tell stories? Martin sullenly remained silent. Then Molly looked at her watch. You have exactly 10 minutes, and that's only because Daddy asked. Jacob stepped out so he wouldn't interrupt the conversation. He was sure that Molly still loved that loner. Except her pride. Half an hour had passed. The house was quiet, and Jacob decided to return. He opened the door and froze. Molly and Martin were standing in the middle of the room, hugging, when they both heard Jacob. Then from Zero and from each other, Jacob laughed. I see our family is getting bigger and bigger. Molly smiled embarrassedly at Dad. What a fool I was. It turns out that Martin is shaking his head stubbornly. No, the biggest fool in this situation is me. Jacob didn't have time to answer anything because his phone rang. It was Andrew. Jacob, how are you? Yeah, I'm fine. Why the mysterious voice? Are they packing their bags? Peter has been dishonorably banished. Is your rightful place waiting for you? Jacob exhaled, that's news, but no muse. But you're an excellent surgeon and neighborhood hospitals are not enough for your scale. Jacob hung up the phone, confused, turned to Molly. Here is back, Molly, smiled and hugged him. Daddy, it's good your place in a real hospital. Especially since we've decided to go back too. Jacob raised an eyebrow. Duck, I guess you two should get married. Martin and Molly laughed. Papa, neither of us ever bothered to get a divorce. Many people came to see off the surgeon and Martin and Zach. Even Lucy came, though she didn't come close to everyone. She stood aside. Colleagues arranged Jacob fancy send-off, and today he even has a little headache. Molly saw what was sneaking up on her. Juliet is tanned and beautiful. Molly, can I give you a hug? I never realized what an attentive and loving husband I have. Thank you. A car stopped at the gate, and no one got out for a long time. Martin looked at it anxiously. Finally, the door opened and Lisa came into the light. Martin jerked toward her, but Molly held him back. The woman didn't look her best. She leaned against the car and stood like that. Molly approached her. Are you all right? Lisa looked at her and cried. Can you forgive me for being such a fool? When I found out I had a grandson, it turned me upside down. I can't eat. I can't sleep. Molly stared into Lisa's eyes for a long time, trying to find a single drop of deceit, but she couldn't. She smiled afterward. I guess I'll have to forgive you. We're family. Anyone can make a mistake. Martin breathed a sigh of relief. No matter what his mom had done, she was still his mom. And he couldn't turn his back on her anyway. And it would be very hard to choose between Molly and his mom. Martin picked Zach up in his arms and said, Shall we go meet Grandma? Zach's eyes rounded in surprise. And then there are relatives. There are so many. Martin laughed. It happens. And we're also hoping that Mommy will give you a brother or sister. As soon as possible.
Subscribe and click the bell.
Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, is rightly considered the tourist pearl of this country. Every year it attracts more and more tourists. Located on the banks of the Kura River, this city has a special charm that has attracted the hearts of people from all over the world. Here and the family of the famous businessman Stephen Otis went on a joint trip to the capital of Georgia. Staying in a beautiful hotel near the mountains, the Otis family has always been an example of prosperity and harmony. Stephen was happily married to his first university and loved Adriana for over 20 years. The businessman's wife was a talented artist and was busy raising 3 children. The eldest was 18-year-old Nancy, the middle was 16-year-old Christopher, and the youngest was Princess Molly, who was barely 6 years old. Stephen and Adriana were not only loving parents, but also loyal friends to their children. They spent a lot of time together, traveling, visiting museums and theaters. There was an atmosphere of love, respect, and support in the Otis home. Every evening, the family gathered in their large 2-story apartment. Around the big table, they shared all the news and plans for the future. The spouses taught their children to appreciate labor, to be responsible and kind. Nancy, Christopher, and Molly grew up confident and ready for adulthood. The Otis family was happy and grateful to fate for giving them such wonderful children and a faithful friend in the form of a husband. They knew that together they could overcome any difficulties and achieve any goals. In one of the family evenings in the Otis dining room, they decided how to spend their vacation and where to go to languish in Moscow all summer. Nobody had a desire to go. They thought for a long time, and each of the adult members of the family offered different options. Nancy wanted to fly to Dubai, Christopher to Israel. Parents wanted to go somewhere closer to Abkhazia, Georgia, or Dagestan. Ma started to object. Adriana, Christopher, but what Dagestan? There's practically nothing to do there. What's interesting there? Fortresses, mosques, nature. The woman listed. Sightseeing is not enough for you. That's not interesting. I liked my dad's suggestion to go to Georgia. I supported my parents' wish. Nancy, there's a lot to see there. How do you know? Asked my sister Christopher. You're not gonna believe what I Googled. Showed her brother her phone with the results of Georgia's query. See what? You didn't even think to monitor all the suggestions. I'm gonna look too. Pull out your phone and make the necessary inquiries, said Christopher. And I'll tell you if I'm in for Georgia. You have 5 minutes to vote, said Stephen, and started the stopwatch on his wristwatch. Let's go, Tanishka, and I will clear the table in the meantime. 5 minutes later, the older children decided to agree to the trip to Georgia. It remained only to think over the route, where to fly to, and what cities to visit. In the end, Otis decided to fly to Tbilisi to devote 2 weeks of their trip to visit all the most cozy corners of the original and interesting city. They rent a car and set off on the Tel Aviv route. Signal Kakheti, ancient cave town of Pluls. Scheme. When the Otis family prepared the necessary documents, settled all the things in the business, booked tickets, and collected the necessary things for travel and rest, little Molly did not forget to bring along her favorite toys. Their flight was due in the early morning, so they woke up before dark and headed to the airport. Upon arrival, they went through check-in and security check, after which they went to board the plane. When they boarded the plane, they were greeted by friendly flight attendants who helped them find their seats and explained the safety rules. Soon the plane took off, and the Otis began their journey in the sky. During the flight, some slept, some looked out the window, and some watched movies and played games. But all Christopher, Molly, and Stephen with Adriana were enjoying the food that the stewards were offering. Little Molly enjoyed watching the clouds and marveling at the beauty of the earth from a bird's eye view, actively commenting to her daddy, "What does she see?" So, has the Stephen family spoken? We are back on solid ground and more exciting adventures await in the future. Hooray! The rest of the family shouted with glee as they passed the beginning of their journey with cheers of joy. From the airport, Otis went straight to the hotel, where they rented 4 rooms for 2 weeks and every day made trips to the city for excursions. The whole family noted that in Tbilisi modernity harmoniously combines with historical heritage, creating a unique atmosphere. Tourists enjoyed visiting ancient fortresses, temples, and monasteries, which reminded of the past of Georgia, and with no less pleasure viewed modern skyscrapers, shopping centers, and entertainment complexes, which made life in the capital of Georgia convenient and comfortable. Walking along the streets of Tbilisi, Nancy photographed the bright and colorful facades of houses decorated with folk ornaments and stucco. Stephen and Adriana appreciated the old town, where the famous northern baths, built in the 17th century and still popular with locals and visitors, are located. Christopher and Molly were most impressed by the Kura River embankment, where they were able to enjoy the beautiful views of the river and the city, and most importantly, to try Georgian cuisine in one of the many restaurants located on the embankment. When the city sights were over, the Otis family decided to go to the mountains to get a bird's eye view of Tbilisi. Nancy, who didn't want to go for fear of ruining her manicure and tearing things, had to be persuaded the longest. But Mama went back to begging Nancy, "Can't you spend your leisure time in a civilized way?" "What do you call civilized?" Adriana asked her daughter to sit in the room or sleep on the phone, to go down to the table only. "You're exaggerating again, Mom," sighed Camille, civilized. "It's city tours, museums, a motorboat on the river Camille in the mountains. Well, that sort of thing. You're grown-ups. You need it. And you're an adult too," the woman reminded me. "Soon to be 19. And you're acting like a spoiled teenager. You don't want to come with us, that's fine. But you can't go alone in a foreign country. You're gonna sit in your room and wait for us. And it's clear you've planned a bed for the whole day, but we'll come back. And then we'll go for a walk along the night quay until the evening alone, without jumping out of bed." Nancy began to gather. "I'd better go with you. I don't want to puff myself up all by myself, but I'll have to redo my manicure." "You will," Adriana smiled. "Daddy paid for the course and bought you everything you need for a reason. Get dressed quickly. You have 15 minutes to get ready. I'll meet you downstairs." An hour later, the Otis family was on their way to the bottom of the mountain. Motorcycle, which is part of the Sagittarius Ridge. There they were met by a guide who would take them to the top of the mountain to the highest point of Tbilisi and tell them about the sights. A powerful path led the tourists to the elevator that would take them to the top. The tour guide was pouring out facts and interesting stories like from a cornucopia. "Let me remind you that this is the highest point of Tbilisi," the guide told us, "as much as 740 meters above sea level." "Excuse me," Nancy interrupted him. "Why does it have that name? Does it translate somehow, I suppose?" "Yes, of course it does. The name of the mountain translates from Georgian as the Holy Mountain. Holy Mountain is Christopher. Yes, literally Holy Mountain. According to legend, the ascetic street David settled here in the 6th century. And in the 19th century, a stone church was built on the site of his prayer room." The guide continued the story. "Around the church since 1929, there is a pantheon with numerous burial places of prominent people of Georgia, famous writers, artists, scientists, and national heroes." "I understand," Stephen inserted a remark into the guide's monologue. "The TV tower is at the very top. We will go to it, or go straight to the Turtle to Hymn Lake. The TV tower, height of 275 meters, was built in 1955 on the very top of the mountain. It can be seen from almost every corner of the city, and it is one of the symbols of Tbilisi." Excursion guide, stopping near the platform for cars. The funicular continued. "There is also a park where we can go out and a restaurant. One of the walls of the restaurant is decorated with monumental frescoes and paintings dedicated to Pirosmani. We will climb up there as well and go to the lake." A leisurely ascent among beautiful nature took about 10 minutes. During it, Otis listened attentively to the guide, looked around with interest, and took lots of photos to save their memories in a photo album. Climbing to the top, they answered donuts in the cafe, cable car, enjoyed the view of the city, and walked around the park. After an hour, they headed to the other side of the mountain to reach the Turtlesitz Lake. That's how they spent an unforgettable 2-week vacation in Tbilisi as a family. But Parabola is going on a car tour through the ancient cities of Georgia to admire the nature and architecture of small towns and continue their acquaintance with this amazing country. Between Telavi and Signal, the Otis family saw advertisements for several hiking trails through the mountains. They decided to stop and take part in one of the climbs, choosing a mountain that was not too high. After all, little Molly was completely unprepared. After making their way to one group, led by an experienced guide, they set off on a little hike through the mountain peaks in the expanse of Georgia, following a route that took them over cliff faces and glades with their warrior trees. Parents feared for their children's lives. And as, apparently, not for nothing, Nancy liked to take crazy pictures. She got too close to the edge of the cliff and plummeted down so fast that no one had time to react. "Nancy!" All the family members screamed in unison. Stephen, saving her rather that with her Stephen, sobbing, rushed to the edge of the cliff. Adriana, stop." Stephen grabbed his wife tightly. "Stop. Don't you dare look over there." A real panic and commotion ensued. Tourists gathered around. Unsuccessful mothers were screaming and wringing their hands. The younger children didn't know what to do. Frightened little Molly was sobbing uncontrollably. Approaching cautiously to the edge of the cliff with several men who had called together to help, the head of the family felt an attack of bad luck. But then, to his incredible relief, he saw that his daughter had by some miracle managed to cling to a sturdy-looking bush that was growing out of a crevice in the cliff. If it wasn't for this horrifying accident now grabbing everyone's attention, one could admire the view from here. It was simply breathtaking. A valley spread out below, covered in a green carpet of grasses and bright patches of flowers. The air was clear and incredibly fresh, filled with the scent of mountain plants. The sky seemed to glow from within with a bright porcelain blue color without a single cloud of sunlight illuminating the valley, making it even more beautiful. The wind lightly moved the grass, creating waves on the sea of green. And not far from the cliff, sheep were grazing on a small plateau area. "Honey, don't move," Stephen shouted. "We're going to get you out of there." "Somebody help me. What are you standing there for?" "We have to do something. We've already called the rescue team." Another tourist tried to calm the man down. "Yeah, by the time they get here, my daughter could be down. But we can't get her out of there by ourselves," the guide said. "No one has a rope." "The sobs are yours," Adriana asked. "Maybe we could toss it to my girl so she can untie it, and we'll pick her up." "No," answered all the participants in the event in turn. All the while the other campers, the tour guide and Adriana, and the kids were trying to figure out how to save Nancy. Until the rescuers arrived, Stephen was thrashing around looking for real help and trying to talk to his daughter, who was sobbing with fear and afraid to move, while everyone was thrashing around looking for a solution. A young lad nearby sheep herded the sheep. Seeing what a difficult situation the girl was in, decided to help. The pasture was covered with lush green grass, which softly sowed bodies under the feet of the guy, who moved towards the rock on which the accident occurred. The sheep were all the while grazing peacefully in the meadow, their white wool glistening in the sunshine. The shepherd was able to climb a ledge low off the ground so that he could reach Nancy with a rope. He succeeded, but the girl was so frightened that she did not know what to do with the rope, especially since she didn't have enough space. The tourist guide and the girl's parents watched the young man from above, who began to climb up the practically allotted rock Helena. The ascent was difficult and dangerous. The rock was so steep and slippery that the young man's boots could barely hold on for longer than 2 seconds on small exposures. But he kept climbing, clinging to ledges and cracks in the rock. His hands and feet trembled with exertion, but he did not give up. At last, after much effort, the lad managed to reach the bush on which Nancy was stuck. He obliged the already exhausted by her screams and fear victim, and climbed higher to pass the rope to the standing men. The further ascent was even more difficult and proved no easy test for the shepherd. The surface of the rock was uneven and covered in small cracks, making every step dangerous. Despite this, he kept moving upward, overcoming fear and fatigue. His hands were slipping on the smooth surface of the rock, but he persevered on his way to the safe path where he was eagerly awaited. Finally, by the combined efforts of his father, the guide, the young man, and several male hikers, the distressed Nancy was pulled out. "My dear," shaking hands with his daughter's savior and hugging him tightly, almost crying, said Stephen. "Thank you so much for saving our treasure. Ask for anything you want. Any amount will pay it all." "Thank you. I'm fine." The young man was embarrassed. "I'm glad I could help, and I'm happy I did. Now I must go before my herd scatters all over the plateau. Goodbye, our savior." Adriana hugged the boy goodbye, with tears of joy. "Goodbye." The young man said goodbye to everyone and disappeared from sight around a dangerous corner. "What a noble lad," said Nancy, Stephen's mother. "He should be thanked anyway." Tanya interrupted Stephen's wife. "Now we must think of a way to bring her daughter to her senses. I'll deal with this shepherd later." "Yes, of course," agreed Adriana. "Take Christopher and Molly, hold their hands, Do not let them out until we come down from this stupid mountain. Otis, the head of the family, gave instructions, and I'll carry the cash in my arms. There's an ambulance waiting for you at the bottom, the tour guide remarked, and I'll go with you to help and back you up on the descent. Thank you, thanked the man, taking Nancy in his arms. He commanded, let's go. Of course, none of the Otis continued after all the events. A car tour through the towns of Georgia. They returned to Tbilisi to the hotel where they had stayed earlier. There Nancy spent several days under the care of a private doctor. The girl lay on her bed, drowning in soft change. Her long hair was spread over the pillow, and her face was lightly touched with a blush. She was dressed in a light white shirt, which beautifully lightened her slender figure. The room during the day was always flooded with sunlight, the rays of which penetrated through the open window, filling the air with warmth and coziness. On the wall opposite the bed hung a painting of a mountain landscape. This subject later on reminded the victim very much of what had happened. Eventually, she took it down and put it away. Coming to her senses, Nancy settled down to recall all the events that had taken place that day. For from the shock, it seemed to her as if none of it had been real, as if it had not been with her. But she knew that her life had almost been cut short on that stupid slope for wanting to take a cool picture. Mom told Camille about her rescuer, who was on a tip from nearby. We wanted to thank him, Mom shared with her. But he said he didn't need anything. Dad tried to give him an envelope with a small amount, but he handed it back. I want to thank him myself, Nancy said confidently. Where can I find him? What's his name? Nancy, dear, he has a very interesting name, Rick. And he's not hard to find, not far from his father. He grills kebabs for tourists in the countryside and herds his sheep. But first, you have to get your strength and eat, Adriana warned. The next morning, without informing her parents, but only leaving a note in the room, Nancy went in search of her savior. On the way, she bought a small souvenir, a bottle of Vagiani wine. The girl very quickly found the parking lot of her savior, and when she hesitantly froze quite close, she could make out the young man who had pulled her through the abyss. Rick appeared to be a man with a distinctly Georgian appearance, tall, slender, with dark hair and slightly swarthy skin. When he turned in her direction, Nancy glared at his eyes, which had an unusually deep dark color, almost black. Hello, was all Nancy could utter. Both answered in their native language. Rick, what can I do for you? I'm you. The girl was confused. You don't remember me. A couple days ago, you saved me. I fell off a cliff, and a beautiful stranger smiled, and a guy, for the rescue of which everyone wants to hand me money. I'm glad you're okay. But I'm not going to change my mind about the financial reward. Every self-respecting man would do the same. My name is Nancy. The girl blushed. And I didn't come for that. Or rather, I came to thank you for saving me. But I didn't bring money. I brought wine. They say it's very tasty. I thought you might like to accept such a modest gift from a rescued person. Nice to meet you. Nancy, my name is Rick. But you obviously already know that from the wine. Thank you. Chuckles. It's my pleasure. Would you like a kebab? I'd love one. While Rick prepared the necessary ingredients, sliced the meat, forgot our puree, and set them on the brazier, Nancy was chopping onions and spooning Billy sauce over the meat to make it more succulent. As we talked, the young man kept making sure the meat didn't burn but was still good about roasting, and in doing so, he never stopped sharing stories from his life. Nancy listened avidly to Rick's pleasant, deep, and richly toned timbre, which seemed to nod to the girl. The young people had long ago switched to you and were telling each other about themselves and eating freshly fried kebabs with great appetite. By the middle of the conversation, Nancy suddenly realized that she had fallen in love. And Rick, as if nothing had happened, continued to talk about his life. I live here in the foothills, and only in the summer. My parents worked hard, and I grew up with an uncle, and who had no family of his own. He is now almost 70 years old. Bidzina. It's hard. Housekeeping. So here I am helping out as and when I can bat. Hee through Nancy. That means uncle in Georgian, smiled back Rick. Sometimes I have native Georgian words and expressions in my speech, although I speak more Russian. I even study at a Russian-speaking university. Which one? Where? And for whom? I asked a young man a lot of questions. Nancy, you don't think I'm prying. I'm just curious. I still haven't decided what I want to study. My parents gave me a year to decide. I'm studying at the Faculty of Humanities at Tbilisi State University. Believe me, I didn't choose where I got into school. You only help your uncle in the summer. And I live in a dormitory. But soon I'll graduate, and I hope to find a job close to home to keep helping him. And I myself like to take care of pledges, chickens, and other household chores. Tell me about your life as a student. Asked, chewing another piece of fried meat. I'm very interested. Student life is full of adventures and interesting events or innovations, began the story Rick. Every day becomes a new challenge for us. So everyone stared fearfully at the guy, perplexed Nancy. No, of course not, laughed the shepherd. I'm just kidding. But we do have adventures, although it's more of a quest. What kind of quest? Who has time to bathe before the couples? Generally the showers, which is one for the whole floor. Rick started listing off by twiddling his thumbs, then whether you can have breakfast, because someone might have already eaten your food or burned the kettle. Bloody hell. That's all the girl could say. But you get used to it quickly. It's very interesting at university. We socialize a lot with friends, with classmates, play computer games, and I often read books. You can participate in various student clubs and activities, which helps you develop your skills and knowledge. I like to read too. I even dream of writing. I don't know yet though. Nancy shared her thoughts. What exactly are you reading? But I really like John. Without thinking, answered Rick. Well, and Russian classics I read. I'm interested in that too. I was especially impressed by Dostoevsky. And you have a favorite book? I'm a book music lover, said Nancy. I read everything that I like and interested in the annotations, but more often it's detectives, fantasy, novels, but not love, but family sagas, for example. And my favorite is A Banal Bookmaster and Margarita. Everyone knows it now. Yeah, it's incredibly popular, and I'm cool with it. I have another favorite book, Perfumer. The story of one murderer, shared by a girl, and Jane Eyre. These 3 books I collect in different editions and translations. Good choices, great literary taste, praised Rick. As for me, I can't collect a big library yet, but as soon as I graduated from college and settled either in my parents' house or in my uncle's, I realized my dream to collect the entire collection of books by Sergei Lukyanenko. Wonderful plans, said Camille, raising her glass. We should drink to the realization of dreams. Let's drink to dreams that should come true. Rick won the hearts of a young metropolitan girl who had never seen such a handsome, intelligent, and brave man. When he decided to walk Nancy to the hotel, the girl agreed. Almost reaching the hotel, she confessed her sympathy to the young man. Rick was not averse to having an affair with a beautiful young Russian woman, so he offered her to meet tomorrow and go on a date. Happy and elated Nancy returned to the hotel in high spirits, where her angry parents, who could not contact her all day, were waiting for her. After all, the glossless had left her cell phone in her room. The young couple met in secret. Nancy was afraid to tell her parents that she was in a relationship with a Georgian. She had to come up with ridiculous excuses not to go to dinner with her family or not to participate in excursions. But the date of their departure arrived. The day before, Rick and Nancy exchanged contacts and promised to write and call each other constantly. The rest of the summer and the whole fall the lovers spent at a distance. They were constantly video calling and texting every minute of the day. On winter vacation, Nancy decided to come to her beloved in Tbilisi, but she came up with a completely different story for her parents. What was it? Surprised Adriana. When the daughter announced her plans for the winter holidays, ski resort, Nancy told us. In Adygia, and Krasnodar region Lisa, and I want to go skiing for a week. Two young, beautiful girls tried to talk my daughter Stephen out of going. One will go to hell to go skiing. Unthinkable. You think it over. I'm not talking to Lisa. She has her own parents. But we're not done with you yet. But Dad started to whine and pity Nancy. Her parents are letting her go. And I'm stuck here like a schoolgirl in front of you, going to a night disco. We'll get rooms. We'll be supervised by instructors. It's a gated community. I promise we won't go off base. Crazy. All right, Mom agreed, with the condition that you stay in touch at all times. Thanks, Mommy, I will. No one asks me, as usual, spotted me by the bullet. Well, please, okay, waved in the direction of his daughter Otis. But keep Mommy's condition. What can I do with you? You're gonna be 19 soon. You're Miss Independent. Thank you very much. Nancy hugged her father. I'll run to the Mariinsky and pack my bags. Don't you need to buy tickets? Adriana asked. I already bought them. I knew you would agree. Sending a kiss from the stairs, the girl ran to her room. The girl very quickly got ready for the road, persuaded Lisa to fly with her, but only to Georgia, not to Moisture. And happy on January 1, she flew with her friend to Tbilisi. Rick met them there, joyful and madly in love with his girlfriend. The friend settled in a separate room, but when her parents called, Nancy was always near, creating the necessary alibi. And in the rest of the time the girl was walking, getting acquainted with the city and national peculiarities on her own. After all, Nancy did not leave her beloved not a step away. Rick decided to show the girl in the capital of Georgia what they had not seen with their parents in one of the evenings, when the sun was slowly descending over Tbilisi, enveloping the city in a golden pink glow, and the city walls, decorated with ancient frescoes and mosaics, sparkled in the rays of the setting sun like precious stones. The boy led Nancy through the narrow streets of the city. They walked leisurely, holding hands. Among the ancient buildings and ancient churches they strolled, inhaling the fragrance of blossoming trees and listening to the birds singing. The lovers were like two parts of one whole, perfectly complementing each other. He was tall and slender with hair the color of raven, winged and graceful, and delicate. With long curls, Nancy's eyes glowed with love and joy as she looked at Rick. That evening they passed by small cafes and restaurants where the locals were enjoying their evening out, sipping flavored coffee and eating delicious and Georgian dishes. The lovers stopped to buy fresh fruit and sweets from the street vendors. As they strolled through the old town, they noticed a group of musicians playing traditional instruments. Rick and Nancy stopped to listen to the music and enjoy the atmosphere of old Tbilisi. The next day, they decided to go to the botanical garden for a picnic, and tonight they danced under the stars, accompanied by street musicians, enjoying each other's company. In the morning, Rick and Nancy bought hot chachapuri and lemonade and went to the botanical gardens for a picnic. The landscape of the botanical garden in Tbilisi impressed the young lady very much. It is more like a big forest in a canton surrounded by mountains, she said to her young man as she walked past several ponds with frogs. After looking at the waterfalls and stopping and sitting down on the grass near the stream, how beautiful it is here. Close your eyes and take in the atmosphere of this wonderful place, said Nancy. You can hardly hear the sounds of the city here. Yes, agreed Rick. It's a place of strength for me. I like to come here, find a cozy corner, and have a little picnic. We, by the way, as long as we walked, never once saw a single cafe, and you won't find one here. At several tropics you can meet vending machines with water and soda, shared information about his favorite place Topaz. This place is still a bit original, and the authorities do not want to spoil the landscape of the garden. We do not meet such a thing in Moscow, laughed. If there is a park, square, garden, and so on, there is bound to be a cafe, restaurant, or small stores with ready-to-eat food. I know. I was in the Russian capital a couple of times with my parents. I didn't really like it. Why such a big city? So many places to visit. Nancy wondered. It's too noisy, Too crowded and the subway. Rick laughed. I've never quite figured it out. You haven't been to St. Petersburg yet, said the girl. Tell me, where will we go tomorrow? And the day after tomorrow before we leave? Do you have plans? Yes, of course. Rick said mysteriously. Let's eat, or the chakapuri will get cold. The next day, the couple spent almost the whole day in the room watching movies and eating junk food. And in the evening, having put on comfortable shoes, Rick took Nancy to the Tabora Monastery. It was not crowded to watch the sunset at the temple, and from the observation deck, there was a beautiful view of small and charming Tbilisi. And the next evening before departure, Rick proposed to the girl in a restaurant, quietly having dinner and enjoying each other's company. The young people reached the dessert. What was Nancy's amazement when instead of ordering a new Anna Pavlova cake, she was brought a red velvet box on her plate. At that moment, Rick got down on one knee in front of the girl. Whose are you, the meaning of my life? The guy started his speech, confused in languages. I don't have enough words in Russian and Georgian languages to express all the feelings I have near you. Sweetheart, become mine forever. Make me happy. Marry me. I will, exclaimed happy Nancy. I do, agreed Rick. Putting the ring on her finger, her lover kissed her and lifted her in his arms, encircling her, and then asked her to dance. Against the background of their idyll, and sounded a small restaurant orchestra, which created an atmosphere of love, tranquility, and happiness. So ended an unforgettable week for the couple in love, and began a new story engaged Nancy and Rick at the airport. Saying goodbye, they knew that they parted for a short time, because the girl decided to immediately tell her parents about everything. Upon arrival in Moscow, the friends said goodbye and got into different cabs. The driver Nancy turned on a quiet, soothing music, which helped the girl to relax a little and forget about all the problems and worries. As they drove through the night city, Nancy looked at the twinkling lights and thought about how beautiful the capital was. Finally, after a short but pleasant ride, they pulled up to the girl's house. The cab driver helped unload the luggage and said goodnight. Nancy, thanking him for the wonderful ride, paid for his services. Having gone up to her floor, she opened the door of the apartment and breathed in the familiar, cozy smell of her native home. I won't tell them anything today, Nancy thought, hugging her parents. All the talking in the morning. Family. Joyful and disembodied Nancy flew into the dining room. I have wonderful news for you. So anxious to know what his daughter's news was on getting married. The girl blurted out. I mean, Christopher choked on his tea. Nancy, what kind of joke is that? Adriana gasped in surprise. Who is he? Asked the father. It's not a joke. Putting her hand up and showing her ring, Nancy replied. My fiancé, Rick. We have been together for a long time, and we love each other. Is this the shepherd who saved you? Asked the brother. Yes, he is. I went to thank him and couldn't part with him. After we left, we stayed in touch all the time. And on New Year's Eve, I decided to visit him. So you didn't go to see him? Mom asked. No. I went to Tbilisi again, but I was really with Lisa. I didn't know how you would feel about the fact that I went there, so I lied a little. But I have a little decency started to tell off my daughter Stephen. And the fact that you are together and that he proposed to you is an even bigger lie. Sweetie turned to Nancy the mom. He's Georgian. Are you ready to be a Muslim? Mom. In Georgia, the main religion is the Orthodox Church. We were told about it on the tours, but it's still weird. She's a big girl. Let her decide for herself. We're not thrilled, but he seems like a nice guy. Invite Rick and his parents over. Nancy squealed with joy, threw herself on her father's neck, and smacked her parents on the cheek, and rushed off to call her fiancé with the news and an invitation to come over. Rick agrees with the bride's parents and decides to come with his parents. In 2 weeks, they will return from a business trip and stay in Moscow to wait for their son from Georgia. The long-awaited day came when the son's parents were to meet at the Moscow airport early in the morning. Robert, Kevin and Miranda drove to the airport to meet Rick. Although they were excited, the parents tried to stay calm and not show their emotions. When they saw him in the arrivals, all their hearts sank with happiness. Rick ran up to them, and the parents hugged the young man tightly. Unable to hold back tears of joy when everyone calmed down a bit, the trio went to a restaurant to have lunch, share the news of the last year they hadn't seen each other, and discuss their upcoming introduction to their future in-laws. Rick was the first to speak, the head of the family. "Tell us about the girl and her parents." "We don't know anything." "Yes, my boy." Miranda supported the father. "You really surprised us with the wedding and meeting the parents. Do you remember that I told you that I saved a girl who fell off a cliff near the plateau where I was herding my uncle's sheep?" "Yes." The parents responded with glee. "So she and I started hanging out," Rick continued. "And after a while we started dating. But then they moved away. But we kept in touch by phone and video. And times. Robert, Kevin, and HIV love long distance through the phone. And to meet in real life to go get a sweetheart. But we met a few months later on New Year's vacation in Tbilisi." Rick gasped with surprise at the young man's mother. "The girl came to you, not you to her. It happened that way. She suggested it, and I agreed." "Blurred eyes," replied the young man. "But after a week together, I realized that I did not want to let her go and made her an offer." "You asked for money for that?" "Yes," continued Rick. "After the proposal, Nancy went home and told her parents about our engagement. And they, in turn, invited us all over to meet her. And here we are," Robert Marlowe stated. "And here you are. I'll call Camille and see if they're expecting us, or if they're not ready yet." "Okay." After looking at the menu, Miranda decided to order. "I'm gonna grab a cup of coffee." We met the family at the Otis apartment. The whole family fussed on the bed on the table and preparing for the upcoming acquaintance. Nancy was anticipating the meeting with her beloved, not thinking about how this acquaintance of parents would go. She spent almost the entire morning in front of the mirror, examining her reflection. From there, a young, beautiful, slender brown woman whose green eyes shone with intelligence and kindness looked back at the girl. Nancy styled her long hair so that it fell over her shoulders in soft waves. It took her a long time to decide what to wear, and in the end, she chose a dark blue dress with a deep neckline in the back and short sleeves. Only the dress was decorated with delicate lace, which emphasized her thin waist, and the skirt was lush and long, which gave the girl an additional grace and elegance. Hearing the intercom ringing and her mother shouting that guests were on their way, Nancy was quickly caught up. On her neck, a graceful necklace of white gold with diamonds, which complemented her image, and in her ears on the move inserted small earrings, carnations with the same diamonds. The image of the girl was completed with elegant shoes, loafers, which she managed to put on right before the front doors opened. And since he was dressed with a needle, he was wearing a classic suit, obviously sewn to individual order. Leather shoes on his feet, his face was smoothly shaved, and his hair was neatly styled. The young Georgian was smiling, and his smile was so sincere and warm that it was impossible not to smile back. He looked at Nancy with love and respect. Barely crossing the threshold, he greeted his parents. His lover gave flowers to Stephen, and Adriana shook his hand. There was silence in the apartment for a second. And then there was a sound of ice cream for the kids, ice cream for his grandmother, flowers. Be careful not to confuse Kutuzov. After this quote, the space exploded with ringing laughter from everyone present. Once everyone had calmed down, Rick corrected the errors of his greeting and introduced his parents, and Nancy hers. Then everyone made their way to the table. A huge table was set up in the living room, left with a variety of dishes. Adriana had made sure that everyone was comfortable and no one would go hungry. That's why there were traditional Georgian khachapuri, lamb kebab, homemade pickles, and much more. Even though the Otis family was very friendly, open, and outgoing, and the Marlowe family was more reserved, they still managed to find a common language. The women talked about their hobbies and shared food recipes, and the men joked a lot and talked about fishing. The younger Otis children felt out of place, surrounded by adults who were having a great time talking amongst themselves. And the older sister couldn't help but admire her lover. So Christopher and Molly went to their father's study after dinner to watch TV there. Toward the end of the evening, before dessert was served, Adriana called the younger Otis to the table. As the woman brought out the cake, topped gracefully with flower petals and brightly colored fruit, Molly slipped her tights-clad feet onto the tile and fell right under her mother's feet. What happened next was like a slow-motion movie. Adriana managed to stay on her feet, but was blown over by the cake. It flew over Molly, through the poof, and landed on the floor, doing several flips in the air. Everyone was scared for the little girl, who was making strange noises. But rushing to her, the parents heard Molly laughing, smearing cream and dessert sprinkles all over her face. And the cake was really good. Smiling, Molly said, licking her fingers, "Now I'm like a sweet dessert too." After examining the girl and realizing that she was all right, everyone exhaled, and looking at the brown stain, flying petals from the bridge, and grimy 6-year-old girl began to laugh. On that happy note, the families laughed the rest of the evening, exchanged gifts, blessed the children with marriage, and promised to support each other in times of need. Rick and Nancy could not be happy with this outcome and did not let go of each other's hands all evening. When Robert, Kevin, and Miranda and their son left, Nancy's parents began to clean the table and mop the floor, trying to clean up the chocolate already under the juice. Adriana and Stephen, having sent the children to bed, for some time discussed the previous evening and thought about what kind of wedding to organize for the young people. "We'll talk to Nancy in the morning," said the head of the family. "It's not for us to marry them to decide." Nancy started talking to her daughter, Adriana. "We really liked Rick's family, and he was at his best when he rescued you." "Yeah." Stephen stepped in, a well-mannered boy and parents. "Good for them, but they're traveling a lot. They don't know much about their son, but it's a good impression. We're going to apply tomorrow," Nancy said. "What kind of wedding in April?" Mom asked. "It's cold. It's raining. We'll only celebrate in a restaurant. There's no off-site registration in the countryside." Mom interrupted Adriana's daughter's monologue. "We don't want all that tinsel with the restaurant, the ransom, and everything. What do you want?" The father decided to ask his daughter. "Rick and I just want to get married in beautiful suits, have a small photo shoot just for two, and fly to Tbilisi to the mountains." In a dreamy voice, Nancy told of her wedding plans. "And what about me and this sweetheart? What about Christopher and Molly?" Adriana asked. "What about our memories of our happiest day, our loved ones?" "Adriana, stop pushing your daughter," interrupted his wife Stephen. "They want to modestly sign and fly away. Then that's what we want, too. I'll pay for you any dress you want and help with the trip. At least we'll be able to go to the registry office." Barely audible, Mom asked. "Of course, at the registry office, Rick and I are waiting for all our nearest and dearest." Hugging her parents, said Nancy. "Thank you for your love." Filing to register their marriage the next day, Nancy and her friend Lisa went in search of a magical wedding dress. "Don't look at the price," her father texted. "Pick the one you like." The girls went around many stores and boutiques, but could not find what they needed. Finally, in one of the bridal salons, the girls saw a dress that immediately caught their attention. Nancy said to Lisa with a gasp, "This is your dress. I don't see any other on you. Go a model bride," listened to her friend, especially since she herself liked the dress very much. The consultant helped the girl to get dressed, and when the curtain opened in front of Lisa's gaze, Nancy appeared in an elegant wedding dress. The corset dress was adorned with a beautiful train and a shimmering bottom. The puffy skirt was adorned with a wide ribbon, which made the fragile image of the young bride chic and at the same time very delicate. Her friends were amazed at how well the dress looked on Nancy. Her green eyes sparkled and her brown hair complemented the look perfectly and blended perfectly with the cream color of the dress. It was the very dress the girls were looking for, paying for the purchase with Daddy's card. The friends went to shoe and jewelry stores to put together the entire wedding look. With makeup and hairstyle, we'll not have to worry. Lissa graduated from makeup artist training and moonlighted as a makeup artist by picking up women for various events on the wedding day. From early in the morning, the Otis home was bustling with activity. The parents were waiting for the groom's family, and the bride and her friend were getting ready for their room when their parents arrived. Stephen went to get his daughter to bring her down from the second floor of the apartment to the groom's room. When Nancy and her father appeared at the top of the stairs, Rick gasped. The bride was wearing a beautiful dress that emphasized her figure. The long train was held carried by Lisa and Molly. The girl's hair was styled in a beautiful updo, from which a few strands were released. These strands framed, and white face, which was decorated delicately. Makeup in hand, Nancy held a bouquet of flowers that matched her dress perfectly. The bride looked very happy and smiled at all the relatives. Her eyes glistened with joy, and her cheeks were ruddy with excitement. The marriage registration took place in Shipolov in the registry office itself. It attracted the newlyweds by the fact that it had a spacious registration hall and was conveniently located near the Terracino Park, where they were to have a photo shoot. Guests congratulated the young ones when they came out of the registry office doors, pelted them with flowers, and gave them gifts. In Terracino Park, you can feel like in a fairy tale. There is everything here for a romantic and beautiful wedding photo session of Rick and Nancy. They shot against the background of flowering gardens, picturesque ponds on elegant bridges, and in cozy grids next to antique columns and sculptures. Bright and emotional photos of the newlyweds were taken. On the same day, the newlyweds went on a wedding trip to the mountains. However, not to Belize as planned, but to Austria. The tourist brochure promised an unforgettable variety of hikes. Nancy and Rick decided that they would walk along the trails along the river, occasionally taking the Penguin elevator to gain more than 1,000 meters in altitude. And they also agreed to make time for the main attraction of Meyer, Hoffman, Berlin, Rachelhen, Vigo. This is the name of the Berlin high-altitude route, which is an 8-day walk from hut to hut, during which tourists have the opportunity to explore the high alpine scenery of the Zieler Nature Park and spend the night at the end of each leg of the journey in a hut. It seemed convenient to the newlyweds, and the fact that from each point there is a route back to the valley, if suddenly they do not like something. After landing at the airport and getting to the hotel, Nancy called her parents and told them about their joint plans to hike the 16th and 17th century Berlin route. She warned that the couple would be out of touch in places, but as soon as she had a chance, she would be sure to let her parents know. 2 days later, Rick and Nancy went on an 8-day hike on the high mountain trail, from where the newlyweds never called Stephen and Adriana, who could not find a place for fear for their daughter. But remembering what Rick is capable of, how selflessly he once saved Nancy, decided to wait for news. But they got the news only when the daughter reported in a text message that she was coming home, and the number of her flight-excited parents went to the airport and immediately saw in the passengers their distraught Spruce and daughter, and her husband was not around. Apparently was not. Shouted Nancy. Stephen and Adriana rushed towards their daughter, who burst into tears when she saw her parents. Dad and Mom could not get a word out of the girl, so they decided to go home and there try to calm and talk to her. At home, finally, Nancy was able to tell her relatives what had happened on the wedding trip. We went to 19th century Berlin. Occasional sobs. Nancy was talking. 2 points we passed successfully. We were happy. At some point, I realized something was wrong with Rick. He was ill. Adriana impatiently interrupted her daughter. No, replied Nancy. I wish he was sick. He just pulled away from me. And on the 3rd day, when we were to continue to the 4th hut, I did not find my husband in our room. I first wanted to go look for him outside, but then I saw a note that he had gone. Where had he gone? Dad asked. Just gone sobbing, said Nancy. Nothing more was said. I decided to turn off the highway and go back to the hotel. There I found that Rick had already been there, packed his things and withdrew all the money from his card. What money? The one I gave you for your wedding. Yeah, and the money I had before the wedding. Nancy ended her story sadly. What a rascal. And you decided to come back right away. Consoling her daughter, Adriana asked, We should report him. We should report him. Stephen resented him. No, Nancy exclaimed. We're not gonna file a report on anybody. If all he wanted from me was money, I'd learn to throw myself in the deep end. But I can't believe it. He looked at me with such love. Before she could finish her sentence, she burst into tears. Honey, Adriana said, hugging her daughter tightly. Stephen walked out of the room, leaving his wife and daughter from them. He was in a rage. The man decided to call the saints to find out what this behavior of their son was, why he had committed such a despicable act. Dialing Robert and barely waiting for the matchmaker to pick up the phone, he began to straighten things out. Stephen abruptly interrupted his Marlowe monologue. Wait, I don't know what you're talking about. What did your son do? Having calmed down a little, continued the conversation. Stephen Otis left his wife at the resort and ripped her off. What? Where do you get such information about a daughter who is hysterical, who was able to return home only because she had some money in cash, who was left alone in a strange country? Nervously replied Nancy's father. That can't be true. Robert Kevin said absent-mindedly. He phoned just yesterday, saying how they were having a great time on their own. But that means he's having a great time with some other Camille, said Stephen Riley. Because our Nancy at home is devastated by your son's behavior. I'll look into it, Marlowe promised. I'll find out where Rick is and why he stole money from your daughter. We're very sorry this happened. But honey and I don't know what happened. Our son truly loves your daughter. I see Stephen has decided to stop talking. Deal with your son, but don't let me see him in my house until he decides to apologize and return the money. Nancy didn't leave the apartment for a month. Christopher tried not to hit on his sister, and little Molly wanted to cheer her up, but she couldn't do it. After another 2 weeks, the girl began to feel nauseous. Otis first thought it was stress and malnutrition, but Nancy noticed on the woman's calendar that she was 3 weeks late. She asked her mom to buy a pregnancy test, informing her of the delay and taking a test the evening and morning of the next day. Nancy saw 2 bright red stripes on the white small cardboard. Mom called out through the closed bathroom door, and Nancy was confirmed. What to do? Nancy, whatever do you decide to keep the baby or not? Adriana answered her daughter. We have to go to the doctor, get an ultrasound and find out the time frame, and then make a decision. Sign me up for breakfast. Okay, sweetie. And don't tell anyone yet. I asked Nancy. She looked out the door. Not Daddy, not my brother and sister. It was a deal. The next day, she and her mom went to the private clinic where their gynecologist was waiting for them. She was asked to lie down on the couch. A special gel was applied and a monitor was turned on which a special scanner reflects the uterus where the doctor can see the pregnancy. Congratulations, Nancy. With a smile on her face, said the doctor. You have a MASH and a pregnancy. I'm 8 to 9 weeks along, which is consistent with your delay. I can still get an abortion? Asked Nancy. In principle, yes. Up to 12 weeks, it's possible. But I wouldn't advise surgical intervention at that stage. There are risks. There's already a heartbeat. Adriana just asked. Turn it on. Let him listen to it. Yeah, sure. The gynecologist answered without taking her eyes off the monitor. Your baby is within the normal range of 140 beats per minute. Listen to this. And in those heartbeats, Nancy heard her baby telling her that he was alive and wanted to be born. It's like my mom knew I couldn't have an abortion if I heard my baby's heart beating. Thought pregnant, letting some mucus out. Back home, they reported the pregnancy to Stephen, who was shocked and didn't know how to react. But he supported his daughter, who was already in a state of shock. And in the first stage of depression, parents decided to send their daughter for treatment for depression in a sanatorium. Prudently negotiated the form of treatment taking into account Nancy's pregnancy. The girl was brought to the sanatorium for 3 weeks. The Otis family rented an apartment not far from the facility so that they would not leave their daughter alone and would be close by even if they could not see Nancy. When they checked the girl into the sanatorium, the head doctor told them that there were 2 psychiatrists, 2 psychotherapists, 2 rehabilitation physicians, and 2 clinical psychologists working in the unit designed to treat depressive spectrum disorders. We also had nurses, along with the initial secondary medical education and experience in medicine for at least 5 years, have a higher psychological education, proudly reported the chief doctor. There is also a procedural nurse, a hostess, a social worker, and a maid to clean the wards. Nancy uncomplainingly agreed to the treatment, hoping to recover before she gave birth. As she checked into her local room and sorted out some of her belongings, she stood at the window and looked out at the beautiful landscape, green trees, blue sky, and bright sunshine. Her room was small but cozy. She had everything she needed for a comfortable 3-week stay: a bed, a nightstand, a closet, and a dressing table. There were paintings of nature on the walls, which added to the coziness. The room even had its own bathroom with a shower and a small washing machine. There was a knock on the door to inform them that there was breakfast waiting for Nancy in the dining room. Going there, she chose an omelet, yogurt, fruit, and coffee. After eating, Nancy decided to take a walk around the grounds. There is still time before the appointment with the attending physician. Lulu thought, leaving the tray near the kitchen and thanking the dining room staff. The territory of the sanatorium was fenced and was very beautiful and well maintained. There were camille with trees, flower beds with flowers, fountains, and gazebos for relaxing. Camille walked around Camille, enjoyed the fresh air, and listened to the birds singing, not thinking at that moment about anything but the child who was now in her womb. What should she do? How to raise the baby? Would she be able to cope with it? These were the questions that Nancy was asking herself every day, adding more negativity to her condition. Suddenly, the phone vibrated in her pocket, announcing that it was time for her to go to the doctor's office. The doctor's office was only small, but cozy. The walls were painted light blue, and the floor was covered with linoleum already yellowed from sunlight. In the center of the room stood a table, on which were medical documents and some medicines. Next to the table was a cabinet with books on medicine. On the wall hung posters with pictures of the human body and its organs. I wonder, she thought, why he needs the internal structure of the body if they are more brain-right. She listened to the doctor in half an ear, occasionally nodding her head and trying to absorb his speech, which just poured in a huge stream. Our sanatorium provides a full range of therapeutic procedures for people with depression, recovering the body after severe stress. Digging through the documents, doctor. Treatment of depression in the sanatorium is carried out according to a special program, which includes diet, hospital, therapy, physiotherapist, physical therapy. Rehabilitation after depression will not only restore your psychological balance, but also bring back the brightness of colors in life. Good mood of joy, positive outlook, especially since you're about to become a mother. On a diet, I will not sit down, gave voice Nancy, and I've already lost a lot of weight. And I don't eat unhealthy, and I'm satiated with small amounts of food. Well, made a note in the chart. Sick, lying down. What about physical therapy? Gentle, of course. I agree, she sighed. If you think it will help me, it should. But most importantly, it should help you. A change of lifestyle, a change of residence, temporary. And no one will remind you of your depression after we meet. You're just resting in a sanitarium. I'm not getting any medication. No. Looking into Nancy's eyes, the attending physician answered, your condition can be normalized without medication. At least I think so. Especially since you're pregnant. We wouldn't risk it. Thank you for your answers. I was the only patient who thanked me for my understanding. I thought it would be much worse, and that I would get nagged for being depressed. We're professionals, and when a person is really depressed, there's a good reason for it, and we don't know many of yours. And personally, I don't see anything wrong with that happening to you, do you? Thank you. Almost in a whisper said Camille, who still thought that she was not behaving appropriately to the situation. Here's your spa book. There is your treatment. And here, opening the penultimate page, the doctor pointed to the top line of your schedule of sessions with the psychologist. No one insists, and if you don't show up, no one will scold you. But if I were you, I'd go at least a couple times. I will. On her way out, Nancy said goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye, Nancy. You'll come to see me on your last day, too. I'll prepare the discharge. All right, thank you. After these words, the door closed behind the girl. But the attending doctor looked at her for some time, thinking about Nancy's difficult life situation and sympathizing with her. While Nancy was being treated for depression in the sanatorium, the girl's parents and brother and sister were also vacationing in Kislovodsk, constantly walking and taking part in many excursions. Otis did not have enough vocabulary to describe to her friends all the beauty of Kislovodsk. Masha was telling her friend Adriana that Kislovodsk is a famous resort of the Caucasus. Since the 19th century, it has been attracting tourists with its picturesque views, clean mountain air, and of course, its famous mineral water. Narzan. Everyone comes here to improve their physical and spiritual health. The friends listened with great pleasure about the famous resort. They looked at photos and watched video stories. National Park in Kislovodsk made a great impression on everyone. The largest city park in his. Adriana had to answer a lot of questions from her friends, telling interesting facts she had heard from the guide. Its creation began back in the first half of the 19th century and continued with varying success in the following 100 years. Stony banks were made fertile by black soil, and plant seedlings were imported from different parts of Eurasia, including Crimea, the Carpathians, and Georgia. The woman quoted the guide as saying, "As the territory expanded, the park was divided into lower, middle, and upper ones, each with its own unique attractions. What kind of plants, trees are there?" The girl wondered. Best friend Adriana. On the territory of the Valley of Roses, one of the parts of the park planted more than 36 species of roses, which fragrant and pleasing to look at. Nancy's mom shared her memories. I don't know about the others. The roses just struck me. Every evening, the Otis family strolled along Kurortny Boulevard, passing 400 poplar trees, despite the fact that the walking area is only half a kilometer long. Here is located a huge number of architectural attractions. Among the architectural structures that attracted the attention of Adriana and Stephen, the old building of the Officers' Assembly, the former Grand Hotel, which now houses the Narzan Sanatorium, as well as the former Podvory Ta Hotel. Every time they passed by these beautiful buildings, the whole family made up different stories about those who might have lived in these apartments. Thus, 3 weeks passed. Nancy had successfully completed her treatment and was sent home. She hoped to learn something about her husband, from whom she was still not divorced. But her father and the matchmakers had no information about his whereabouts. Rick only occasionally wrote to his parents, informing them that he was alive and well. Pregnant Camille coped with the oppressive condition every day and was helped a lot by her loved ones. At the 32nd week of pregnancy, Nancy gave birth to a baby boy and named him Noah. The baby was born a sturdy 3 kilograms, 750 grams, and 57 centimeters tall. Grandparents could not be happy with the boy, who was very similar to his father, but Rick everything except the color of his eyes. Moms, which was extremely surprising, but what only nature will not create. Nancy and her son were greeted from the hospital by the entire Otis family. There was also a friend, Lisa, and even Rick's parents arrived on the day of discharge. Time went by very slowly for the young mom. Her mood was great. She was already looking forward to seeing her loved ones and introducing them to the new family members. When Nancy and her son finally went into the room for the discharge, she saw how in an instant the excitement on the face of relatives and friends was replaced by great joy. The parents tried very hard to meet their daughter and grandson in a festive way. So there were flowers and balloons and stickers on the car, and a photo session. After arriving home, the baby was placed in a crib on the first floor of the apartment, and all the adults went to the dining room to celebrate the discharge. At the table, Robert, Kevin, and Miranda apologizes for the deed of the son and offers help to the daughter-in-law and grandson. Darling stands up and walks over to Nancy, father-in-law. If you need anything, we are always here to help. We are not giving up on our Noah, putting her arm around her daughter-in-law's shoulders. Miranda said, "He's our breed. He's our Schwilly grandson." Thank you. Thanked Nancy to her husband's parents. I know you are not to blame for Rick's behavior and do not know where he is, so you don't need to keep apologizing for it. He embarrassed us, said Robert. What he did was wrong. When I get nervous and often say things in my native language, I'm sorry, yes, we noticed, trying to diffuse the situation, said Adriana. We will soon speak Georgian ourselves. We already know so many words. And then everyone laughed. Yes, so loudly and resoundingly that woke up Noah, who peacefully advised in the crib. In general, the baby was surprisingly calm. He did not scream, just let his mother sleep. Only when he began to cut his teeth, he became a little cranky. But it quickly passed. During the first few weeks of life, the baby learns to control his body and interact with the world around him. Starting to smile, walk around and reach for objects. Nancy coped well with taking care of the baby, almost without asking for help from her mom. Depression left the girl. As soon as she saw the face of her Noah lying on her chest in the delivery room, and often took walks with the baby in the park near her home. When the baby fell asleep, she would move to a bench and spend time with a book in the fresh air. Here on Lassany Island, on the territory of the former town of Babushkin, there was Babushkinsky Park, in which Nancy sat. She had loved this park since she was a child. It was as if it had been created for leisurely strolls and relaxation all year round. In warm times, little Lulu would ride a horse here, admire the water play of the lights, the musical fountain, and the whole family watched a movie in the summer theater 5. Now the young mother even had the opportunity to stay on the internet connection with her favorite friends, sitting teenager's tree with Flaubert's favorite novel, Madame Bovary. After all, there's a free Wi-Fi zone. Suddenly, Nancy's phone rang, and an unfamiliar number popped up on the screen, obviously from another country. Camille thought of calling it, but something made her answer it. She heard her husband's familiar voice in the speaker, and she hung up in fear. Barely holding back tears, Camille tried to stop shaking. But then came a text message from the very number that was now calling. Apparently, you recognized my voice, so you hung up. Yeah, it's me. Rick decided to let you know that I'm alive, and I'm okay. Of course, I can't write much in the message, because I always want to say more in person, looking into your eyes. The only thing I want to write is that I'm sorry. I'm very ashamed that I had to do that. But I had huge problems, and I didn't want you to know about them. I want to video call you today to tell you more about it. But if you don't want to talk to me, I understand. I'll call you. And if you don't pick up, I'll never bother you again. She was still not completely calm. She quickly gathered herself, took the stroller, and quickly moved towards the house, where she called her friend to ask her what to do. Still unable to come to a common decision, Nancy decided to listen to her heart and do what it told her to do at that moment. It was lucky her parents weren't home. No one could prevent the girl from having a conversation, should such a thing take place. Taking care of her son, Nancy was able to distract herself a little. But when the phone rang, a familiar tune set to video call, she froze in surprise. Taking the phone in her hands, she didn't hesitate long enough to answer it. The painfully familiar face of her beloved husband appeared on the screen. They were silent for a few minutes, then both of them cried. Having calmed down a little, Nancy's husband began to tell what had happened in his life, that he had to disappear so suddenly for more than a year. Helping my uncle had caused me to miss almost an entire semester. With a sigh, Rick spoke. To keep me from getting expelled, I had to transfer to a tuition-free program, and how to pay for it. It was a shame to ask my parents, so I borrowed money from a loan shark. How did you plan to pay it back? Nancy asked. I thought I'd work and pay it back slowly, but it didn't work out. The interest grew exponentially, and I owed twice as much as I had originally borrowed. I was threatened, beaten. They demanded all the money back at once. They were thugs. Turns out they were. Rick continued the story. 3 days after the last warning, you had an accident. Why didn't you take the reward money from your father then? Didn't he offer it to you? Nancy exclaimed in surprise. But I thought I could solve the financial difficulties myself, and to take money for a deed that anyone could have done. It's not my policy. When you came to me after a time, I decided to improve my financial situation by marrying you. Young, beautiful, and rich. It was all a lie. Holding back tears, Nancy whispered. Our whole relationship, the words, the vows, the promises, all lies. No, Rick interrupted the girl. At first you just seemed to me a beautiful daughter of rich parents, but then I started to grow attached to you. Our long-distance relationship strengthened my feelings, and my desire to marry you was conscious, and it was based on love for you, not love for money. Why did you leave me? But we would have paid the money and lived happily ever after. When they found out I'd married a rich Otis Harris, they ran up the meter and threatened you. So I figured if I dumped you and gave them the money back, they'd calm down. So I did. I kept some of the money I took from you. I went where? To Turkey to work, said Rick with a smile. Sunny Istanbul for a while, working for different companies. Now I run a European-style hotel atelier. I make good money and live well. What happened? That you finally decided to contact me. Nancy asked me a question. I missed you. Trite, but true. And there was a twinge in my chest. A couple months ago, it was like something happened to you. So while I was thinking about it, I decided to call you. It's been almost 2 months. I want to apologize to you again. I didn't want to abandon you, leave you alone, or cheat on you at all. But at the time, I felt like I had no other choice. Who's crying? Just a second. Disappeared from the camera view for a moment and returned with little Noah in her arms, who immediately calmed down in her mom's arms. Meet Rick. This is our son, who is almost 2 months old. Your son, he mumbled confusedly. How does he look like me? Except for your eyes. Yes, that's what everyone says. And I noticed it too. As soon as I saw our boy. How stupid am I? He lamented. Forgive me, Nancy, forgive me if you can. I didn't know you were in there. If I had, I would never have left you alone. I didn't know myself. I'm afraid, son, replied Rick's wife, was so heartbroken by your act that she didn't immediately realize I was delayed. You have no idea how hard it was for me. I was depressed. I had to go to a sanitarium. And all this while I was pregnant. It's a good thing it was easy. When I gave birth, I was able to come to my senses and completely dissolve in my son, forgetting about you until you called. I'm so sorry. Rick cried. I know you won't forgive me so easily, but I beg you, give me a chance to make it up to you. Come and visit me in Istanbul. I make good money. I live in a separate apartment, and I can take you and our son. I'll come. Nancy said to introduce you to my son and look into your eyes in person. The day after tomorrow, I'll write down the flight number. Don't call me yet. I'll see you later. See you later, Rick said. And he hung up. That same night, Nancy booked her tickets. The flight leaves tomorrow night. After letting her husband know what time and on what flight she would be arriving, Nancy started packing and waiting for her parents at home to break the news. After 8 o'clock, Adriana and Stephen came back to the apartment and, seeing the suitcases by the front door, immediately thought that something had happened. Camille, her daughter, called out, "Mom, please come down and explain what the suitcases are in the hallway." The head of the family shouted from the living room. "Hi, I'll run down the stairs." Threw Nancy to her parents, I just wanted to talk to you like this, said Adriana, taking hold of her heart and sitting down on the sofa. The last time you told us the news, you were getting married. And before that, you were leaving for your lover by deception. I can't take another news like that. I'm leaving this time too. Nancy stated the fact in front of her parents. To Turkey. And more specifically, Istanbul. And yes, I'm going with Noah. I think I'll be gone for a while. And then what happens there? Where? Turkey, Stephen shouted. Have you been to Georgia yet? Look how lucky your husband was to steal from you and throw you in the deep end. Do you want a repeat of the scenario? Daddy, don't yell. Rising to his feet, the young mother tried to calm the parent. I'm not 10 years old to do stupid things. With a small child in my arms, I'm going to Noah's father. Whose father? What kind of father is he? Stephen Otis started to resent him. Wait, how do you know he's there? He called me today and told me everything. I haven't decided if I'm gonna forgive him or not, but it's my duty to introduce my son to his real dad. You're not going anywhere. He wants money from you again. Don't argue with me, Adriana. The man turned to his wife. Say something. Why am I the only one talking to this stupid woman? Stephen. The woman tried to calm her husband. What can you do if she's so determined? Go, baby, if you think it's right. But please, look at the volumes behind the wide-open eyes without rose-colored glasses. What are you talking about? Otis is angry at his wife. He left her, and there's no excuse or forgiveness. I always thought his behavior was strange, sadly said Adriana. He does not look like a man who can abandon his family. Apparently, something terrible happened, and he, being a boy, made a stupid decision. Thank you, Mom, kissed the woman on the cheek. Nancy put her arm around her father's shoulders and ran to her son to feed him. You really think so? Yes, that's exactly what I thought all along. I'm a little shocked, of course. Taking a sip of water, the mom said, Nancy, from our daughter's hasty decisions, but we can't stand on our own. It's her life after all. Good thing after that honeymoon trip we put a tracker in her phone. Stephen chuckled. So we'll know where Nancy is. Okay, so much going on in a day. I want to lie down. Can you at least tell me when your flight is? Adriana asked, walking past the bedroom. We'll walk you out. Okay. Good night. Threw Nancy to her parents. Good night, sweetie, the older Otis said with glee. From the very morning, Nancy was full of energy and impatience. After all, this day promised to be the beginning of an amazing adventure for her and her son. Throughout the day, Nancy went through her suitcases, making lists of things to bring, making sure she had everything. And then the evening before her flight, she had doubts about whether she should go. But the doubt didn't last long. She looked at Noah Nancy and realized she was doing the right thing. Flying to Rick Otis drove her daughter to the airport, 300 hours before the flight. At the airport, they checked their luggage and wanted to wait for the flight with Nancy, but she asked them to go home and not worry about her. I am always on the phone reassuring Stephen and Adriana daughter until they agreed. An hour and a half later, Nancy had gone through all the necessary checks and was standing at the front desk. The smile never left her face because she felt on top of the world, holding Kucherov's angels in her arms. When they announced boarding for the flight, Nancy's heart beat faster. She felt like the heroine of a movie who was setting off to meet her dreams. I've already forgiven him, Nancy thought. How could I not forgive him? For I love him. In this uplifted mood and with joyful thoughts, she went up to the cabin of the airplane. The stewardesses smiled welcomingly as they helped the passengers to their seats. In the cabin, there was an atmosphere of coziness and comfort, and the view from the window on snow-white clouds only strengthened the feeling of joy and serene style. Finally, the plane took off and the journey to Istanbul began. Nancy watched the cities and fields, and then the clouds pass beneath them. And with each passing hour, her excitement grew. Nancy showed her son what was happening behind the glass, the porthole telling different stories. And when the baby fell asleep, She herself did the same. At the same time, Topaz stood in front of the mirror in his apartment and looked at his reflection, seeing in it only an image of his past life, full of mistakes and regrets. He remembered those times when everything seemed possible and simple, when it seemed that his actions would not affect his future life. But the series of decisions he had made had led to loneliness and emptiness. Now, when halfway there was his wife and son, Rick realized that all his mistakes and wrong decisions had left a deep trace in his fate. He couldn't bring back the past and fix everything, but he could start all over again with a clean slate and try to redeem himself and Nancy, whom he had hurt badly. Landing in Turkey was another unforgettable moment for Nancy. When they stepped off the plane, she and Noah were greeted by warm and sunny air filled with the scent of flowers and the sea. Everything around them was so bright and colorful that Nancy couldn't help but smile. As they entered the arrivals area and she began to look for her luggage, she felt someone's gaze on her back. Turning around, Lulu quickly found the familiar, focused look of dark eyes in the welcoming crowd. Her husband, even after a year of separation, was still the same tall, slender man with dark hair only tanned and darker. Rick moved swiftly toward his wife and son and hugged them tightly, so embraced. They stood there for several minutes, not knowing what to say to each other. They silently picked up their luggage and moved towards the exit. That's how the little journey to Istanbul began, where every day was filled with new adventures, meetings, conversations, and unforgettable experiences. Although there were many more discoveries and adventures ahead, Nancy knew that this trip would be remembered forever and would be a pivotal one in their married life. He brought the family to his apartment overlooking the Bosphorus. There he took his son in his arms, and he began to walk around happily, as if he realized that it was his father. Rick played with the baby for a long time, and Nancy silently observed this family idyll. She asked if he had somewhere to put the boy to sleep, to which Rick silently pulled out a crib from behind the screen door. The furniture was obviously new. He must have bought it. Yesterday, thought Nancy, Stella and a crib to the favorite blankets Rick's parents had given her as she put the infant to bed, pre-fed him. She and her husband went to the kitchen to talk in the Turkish man's apartment. The kitchen was not just a place to prepare food, but a cozy corner to spend warm evenings. The walls were painted a delicate shade of ivory, creating an atmosphere of warmth and tranquility. In the center of the kitchen was a large wooden table, and small chairs stood around the table. Natural wood upholstered a floral print fabric on which Nancy and Rick sat across from each other. She glanced around the walls and noticed an antique clock, which with its end reminded her of the quickness of personality and time, and the need to appreciate every moment. Next to the clock was a painting depicting a summer landscape. It added freshness and brightness to the kitchen. I wonder if he thought he had purchased it himself, or if it was already hanging here. Casting a glance at the huge old gas boiler that took up most of the kitchen, it was unkempt, even shabby, and reminded Nancy of the times when whole families would gather around it to keep warm and share news. Nancy interrupted the girls' musings. Rick, thank you for your son. Thank you for keeping the pregnancy alive. I realize you could have terminated it, being full of resentment towards me. Forgive me, please. I'm so sorry. In this year, I've grown, matured both physically and mentally. On my way to you before I even got on the plane, I realized I had forgiven you the moment I decided to pick up the phone when you called on the video link. Nancy rushed over to hug and kiss his spouse. Man, I didn't even expect you to be able to forgive me. Okay, let's close this topic and discuss our future, Nancy suggested, smiling. If you are ready to build it with us, with Noah, are you still hesitating? Rick was surprised. If I wasn't ready to build my future with you, I would never call you again. And the fact that we have a son has strengthened my desire to redeem myself to you is a good thing. But how are we going to live here or go back to Moscow? I'm not ready to live here permanently. I have a couple of business ideas and a friend with whom we're preparing a startup. If everything works out, the business will be here, and I can live anywhere in the world. What's the idea? Nancy wondered. I'm not telling you yet, and I'm not taking money from you. I have yet to get back what I took from you to fully restore my trust. But I don't want to live in Moscow either. I'm sorry. The big metropolis is not for me. I propose to think and move to a place where we both will be comfortable and where Noah will have a place to run and grow up happily, exclaimed. If we live somewhere other than Moscow, then only there, where we met, where we were happy, where your homeland is, where there are boundless fields, where there are boundless landscapes, where we will be happy. Exactly. So you agree with my idea? Sure, honey, I'll go to the end of the world with you, but not to Moscow. Not Moscow, Rick laughed. I'll fly to Russia with you to talk to your parents and apologize to them. Then I'll come back to settle things. In the meantime, you choose a house in Tbilisi, where we'll move to, we'll rent, and then we'll buy our own. No, Nancy interrupted her husband's speech. We'll buy a house at once. I have money for it. I don't want to live in someone else's house and move from place to place several times. All right, if it's more convenient for you, let's do it that way. But I'll buy everything for the house. All right, as you say, conciliatory, said Nancy. And tonight we'll go for a walk. You can show me and my son all the interesting things in Istanbul. One day won't be enough for us, so we'll stay here for a couple of days. We just have to tell our parents. I'm so glad, said Rick, lifting his wife in his arms. What are you doing here? Nancy warned her parents that she would stay in Turkey for a week and then fly back with her husband. Stephen and Adriana weren't surprised, but they didn't let it show. Rick took some time off work to show all the beauties of Istanbul to his family. On the first day, they took the most popular route with a tour of the main attractions of Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque. Rick chose to travel by sea streetcars along the Bosphorus Strait. When they arrived at the pier as a family, they were the ones facing a 20-minute climb through the narrow streets of old Istanbul. Better to walk to get a sense of the city's atmosphere. Nancy was convinced by her husband when he suggested walking. After the walk, the travelers found themselves in the first part of the most important square of the city, Sultan Ahmed. This part consists of small squares with fountains and is surrounded on two sides by the main sites of Istanbul, Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque. The mosque made a big impression on Nancy. Rick told her that it is the first mosque in Istanbul, which is more than 400 years old, and it got its name because of the huge number of white and blue handmade pottery from Rostov. The whole family spent a long time wandering around both the temple and the mosque. Nancy had to dig around for now. Otherwise, she would not be allowed to visit the holy places. The next day, they went to Golhan Park. It is worth visiting because it is April, and this is the season of blossoms. Tulipanov told the previous night of Rick's wife. So Nancy learned that the capital of these flowers is not Holland, but Turkey. The husband knew so many interesting facts about this amazing country, which did not cease to amaze the girl. Tulips are the symbol of Turkey and favorite flower, Sultanov told, walking through the park Rick. Even the name he came up with here, and it comes from the name of the fabric for Turkish chumps. Honey, noticing the beds of roses, asked Nancy. It's not just tulips that grow in the park. How long has this park been here? It's practically the center of town. Yes, Janetsvale, taking his wife by the hand and stroking his son, who is in slang on the head, continued the story Rick Gull. KP is the oldest park in Istanbul. Look, over there is the Topkapi Palace complex. We're going there the other day, and the park was once part of the palace. The name translates into Russian as the Palace of Roses. In the spring and summer, it has over 80,000 roses in bloom, which are perfectly juxtaposed with gorgeous tulip beds. They ended their walk at the Ataturk Monument to the first president of the Turkish Republic. There, Noah's parents looked at the waves of the Bosphorus and made plans for a happy future where their family would grow. And the boy was getting brothers and sisters. During the week, Nancy saw many interesting things in Turkey. She visited many sites, among them Topkapi Palace, Suleimani Mosque, Maiden Tower, Cistern, Basilica, and many others. Before returning home, she was very nervous because she did not know how Rick's conversation with her parents would go, and more importantly, how his meeting with his parents would go. Robert was very scolding and spoke in Georgian, expressing to his son his dissatisfaction with his behavior. When they arrived in Moscow, they immediately went to Lena's apartment to meet her parents. Stephen and Adriana were already waiting for them, having sent Christopher and Molly to the birthday party of a neighbor boy. Otis, the head of the family, was very nervous and couldn't find a place to be, not knowing how to behave with a son-in-law who behaved like that. His wife told him to calm down and listen to everything Rick had to say, and only then decide whether to forgive him or not. He wanted to answer his wife, but not before the key turned in the door and they heard the familiar voice of his daughter and the shout of his grandson's shadow. A moment later, a tan Nancy appeared in the doorway, holding Noah in her arms, and behind her stood frozen in indecision Rick, holding their luggage in both hands. "Hello, daughter." Adriana broke the awkward silence. "How did you get here?" "Hi, Mom." At the parent and handing her grandchild to her, Nancy said, "We arrived well, without incident. We have a lot of news for you, and most importantly, gifts." "I can see that without incident," said Stephen contemptuously. "Everyone made it. No one got lost. No one disappeared." "Daddy Stephen," Adriana said warningly. "Hello, Rick. I'm sorry about your husband. He's very worried, as we all are, but we're ready to listen to you." "Hello," greeted the son-in-law of his wife's parents, closing the door and inviting them into the living room. "I won't talk long. There is no excuse for what I did. I know that Nancy has told you the reasons for my actions, but that in no way excuses me. I am a man, and this behavior is unbecoming." "That's a good point made by Stephen Otis. I do not even hope for your forgiveness, but I will try to restore faith in me as a worthy spouse of your daughter." Turning to his father-in-law, Rick said, "I will return all the money I stole from Nancy. Not immediately, of course, but within a year." "Mom, Dad," Nancy entered the conversation. "We decided to move to Tbilisi, buy a house and live there as a family, build our lives independently." "Wait." Dumbfounded by the news, Stephen tried to understand how it was so quickly made another decision of the daughter. "You have not had time to reconcile with him, and are already making plans for the future. But he'll give me back the money he stole. Let him be thankful I didn't report him." "And then what? How will you be alone in another country?" Adriana asked, playing with her grandson. "Who will help you?" "I'm a big girl, especially as a mom," answered Nancy. "We'll help each other, especially since Rick is about to start a small business in Turkey, and I've wanted to write books for a long time. And I've already started taking notes to write some fairy tales for children. And we won't be in Georgia." One hugged his wife by the shoulders. Marlo remarked, "My parents have settled there, who have retired and will no longer disappear on business trips. My uncle lives there, who, despite his age, will be happy to babysit his grandson. It's nature, mountain air, and my and Noah's little homeland." The conversation between Otis and Marlo continued for several more hours. With each new remark, the attitude towards Rick changed for the better. But Stephen still feared for his daughter's feelings. He suggested they draw up a prenuptial agreement, which the young parents agreed to. And Rick also offered to write a receipt that he would return the money to his wife's father. By the end of the day, the younger Otis children returned and were happy to see their sister and nephew. And little Molly was even glad to see Rick, not understanding why Christopher was staring at Nancy Marlowe's husband like that. Realizing that it was necessary to explain himself to his wife's brother as well, took him to the dining room and there told him everything he thought necessary. After hearing a lot of negativity and threats in response, Rick silently offered his hand for a handshake, and the teenager shook it, thus showing that forgiveness is possible. That same day, the man went to his parents' house to hesitate in front of the apartment that Robert, Kevin, and Miranda rented every time they stayed in Moscow. He gathered his thoughts before he pressed the bell. The door was opened by his father, and he silently disappeared into the gloom of the apartment. Rick crossed the threshold, closed the door and followed his father. There in one of the rooms, his parents were already waiting for him. There were no hugs, caresses, and kisses from his mom, which made the young man very sad. Looking at his mother, who was crying, turning away from her son, Rick realized that she was fighting her desire to hug him. Appearing, Robert interrupted the silence. "Kevin Ivik, and to you, hello, father. Don't you dare call me that." Order's cold tone pronounced, "Daddy Rick, after what you have done, you are not my son." Robert pleaded with the young man's mother. "You can't do that. He's the only one." "No," Miranda contradicted Robert's wife. "You can't leave your wife in a foreign country on her honeymoon. You can't steal money. You can't leave your parents. You can't disappear without giving any news. And who did that? Who violated? You can't do that much. But that's our ex-son. Father, I realize I'm to blame. Don't you understand anything?" Robert Kevin cut off his son's sentence in mid-sentence. "You're not just to blame. Rick, you've dishonored me, my mother, my wife, and subsequently your son. I didn't mean to." As the Marlowe couple's son fell to his knees and began to sob, "I wasn't thinking about what I was doing. I wanted to sort out my financial difficulties and start a new life. I thought I didn't love my wife, but I was wrong. I didn't know Nancy was pregnant. God, I didn't know anything. I didn't even realize the consequences." Son came up to Rick's mother and put her arm around his shoulders. "There in the foreign land, I felt like I was king of the world. In my life began a new chapter," continued to confess to his parents Rick. "But once the realization came that money still had to be made, and I was so smart there, I wasn't the only one who realized I had done something stupid. And when came the realization that I missed Nancy and my parents, I began to think how to reappear in your lives and how to ask for forgiveness. It should ask first of all from my wife." In a calm voice said Robert Kevin Ivik, who silently listened to the speech of his son. "If she can forgive, then the others will try." "I have already forgiven," said Miranda, wiping away her tears. "You're my son, for what it's worth. And Camille has forgiven me," Rick said quietly, "even though I don't deserve it. She's a good woman, a wonderful mother, and, as you can see, a wise wife." Praised his daughter-in-law, the young man's father. "She should be memorialized. After all you've done, she was able to forgive you." "I agree." Raising his eyes to his father, Rick said, "I'll try to get your respect back. I know it's gonna be hard." "We'll see," the man said conciliatingly. "Now tell me, what are your plans with Nancy?" The next conversation with my parents took place in a more cozy family atmosphere. They sat on the sofa, and the son in the armchair opposite them. They talked about various things, but the main topic was Rick's life in Turkey and his successes. His parents asked him about his job, his family, and his future plans. He was happy to answer their questions and share his plans. A young man, and told them about their solid dreams and goals. Both Robert Kevin and Miranda were happy to hear about it. They supported him in all his endeavors and promised to help if needed. At the end of the conversation, the parents wished their son good luck and said they would always be there to help him. After the heart-to-heart talk with his parents, it was as if a stone had been removed from Rick's heart. Still, how important it is to be close to your parents. It's like you're incomplete without them, he thought on the way back to his hotel. After a couple of days, Rick had to return to Turkey to settle things, start a business with a friend, quit the hotel, rent an apartment, landlord, and send his things to Moscow. Marlowe himself moved into the hotel for the days when his presence was needed to organize the startup and initial tracking of the business. All the while, Rick missed his family madly. He was on the phone with, and many times a day, always via video call. He wanted to see both his son and his wife. Nancy, for her part, was looking for the right house for them, constantly sending options to her husband and discussing different purchase offers with her parents. Since Rick had to stay longer, he sent his wife a power of attorney to purchase the property. I drove with my father to Tbilisi to buy the dream house, leaving my son in the care of his grandmother. The cab stopped near a red brick fence, behind which you can see a house of light stone, decorated with a mosaic of multicolored from posts, which glistened in the sun and shimmered with all the colors of the rainbow. Relaxing with the driver, Nancy and her father walked to the wicket beyond which awaited them the dream house they had purchased, which still had yet to be furnished, as Stephen had not yet seen the interior decoration. The daughter had decided to show her father just after the deal was done what was in her house. The first thing the man noted was that the lot was surrounded by green hills, and in the courtyard, vines were tightly intertwined with metal structures, creating several conversations in which it would be nice to hide from the sun on a hot summer day. "Stephen, what a beautiful house. You've already seen it in pictures, haven't you?" Nancy laughed. "We've driven by it. You've looked at it a few times." "Oh, my darling. It's one thing to look at a photo and speed past it." The man smirked and took a seat on a bench in one of the great conversations. "It's another to experience this atmosphere amongst the beauty in such a distinctive country." "I agree with that. Dad, let's go inside. The view from the living room window is amazing." "Come on, you intrigue me." And father and daughter started toward the house, following the paving stones across the spacious yard. Nancy was talking nonstop about the plants growing on the property, but Stephen's attention was attracted by a small fountain, which was located in one corner of the grand palace. Stopping at it, the man listened to the book murmur, "The tea of water that gave peace and coolness." Turning toward the house, Otis saw that Camille had opened the dark wood front door with an intricately patterned door, above which hung a large wrought iron lantern. As he approached the house, he noticed two large cypress trees standing like guards on either side of the entrance, guarding the peace and comfort of the house's occupants. Inside the house, there was plenty of space and light. The large windows were decorated with carved wooden shutters. The walls were sewn with wooden panels, and the floors were laid with noble wood, which gave the building the atmosphere of an old castle with a long history. In the living room, which was the center of the first floor, there was a large fireplace made of natural stone. There were comfortable armchairs and sofas where you could relax after a long day or warm yourself on cold winter evenings. The windows near the fireplace overlooked the backyard, where a large garden with fruit trees and vineyards. Along the paths leading to the garden were wooden benches, inviting you to relax and enjoy the beauty of the surrounding nature. The house was full of light and warmth, spacious and cozy. It reminded of the traditions and customs of ancient Georgia, filling the hearts of Nancy and Stephen with the joy of harmony and hope for the marital happiness that awaited Rick and Noah. Within these walls, the daughter exclaimed with wonder at Stephen, "It's really beautiful. It's a view you just sit back and enjoy. And the whole day is not an evening." And the satisfied Nancy plumped down in the chair and offered to sit in the neighboring chair. "When I saw these landscapes that opened from the windows of the house, I was even stronger in the decision to buy it." "Did Rick see it for himself?" "No," I whispered cryptically. "I haven't even shown him a picture, in case he does not like it," surprised the girl's father. "Such a house with a view of the mountains and a huge home garden." "I doubt it." Standing up from the chair and coming close to the window, Nancy continued, "Especially since he said he trusts me completely." "That's nice. Come on, let's go and show you the second floor," Stephen Otis suggested. "Let's go." A month after buying the house, the Marlowe family moved in completely. Nancy from Moscow brought a lot of things for herself and her son, and Rick from Turkey brought a lot of original interior decorations and several carpets that decorated the living room, bedroom, and 2 children's rooms. The couple had not yet finished decorating the guest rooms, as they were in a hurry to move. They still had to completely unpack, organize the living room and kitchen, as well as fix a few benches in the yard and get a dog. Rick really liked the house his spouse had chosen. He admired the new house and felt comfortable and cozy in it. He couldn't wait to start a new life in it, thought Rick, hugging his wife on the doorstep of their family nest. Every evening they walked around Tbilisi, spent cozy sit-downs by the fireplace, admiring their garden and rejoicing at Noah's first steps and words. Rick loved to look at his wife, shrouded in a halo of tenderness and grace. Her movements were always fluid and graceful, as if she were floating on the ground rather than walking. Hair in soft waves, not falling on her shoulders, dwarfed the face, emphasizing its refined features. Eyes deep and penetrating looked at her son with kindness and wisdom. Around Nancy hovered an atmosphere of calmness and peace, as if the wife was a source of light and warmth for all who were near. Her presence made Tamara and Noah feel cozy and safe, and they felt protected and happy. Nancy felt strange and couldn't tell if it was from the euphoria and happiness from the move, or was it health-related. After sending her husband and son for a walk, she had taken a pregnancy test and was now sitting on the couch with her eyes wide open in surprise, holding the positive pregnancy test in her hands, and her heart was racing. She couldn't believe it. After all, they hadn't planned to have another baby so soon. But the news was unexpected and at the same time very joyful. After all, the dreams of a big family were becoming a reality. She felt overwhelmed with happiness and excitement for how Rick would react to the news. Going for a walk, father and son decided to have a great time. Rick is tall, slender, and was dressed in lightweight long pants and a shirt. And Noah, small and energetic, was in bright shorts and a t-shirt with the image of his favorite cartoon character. They stepped out of the house, and a world full of possibilities and adventure opened up before them. The air was fresh and cool, filled with the scent of flowers and herbs. The father was telling his son about the different things that surrounded them. The 1-year-old didn't understand everything, but he enjoyed every moment with his dad. Rick showed Noah trees, flowers, and birds, and explained how they lived and what they did. As they walked, they came to a park where there were many playgrounds and rides. There they enjoyed riding on the slides and swings. The father watched his son with a smile on his face, delighted with his happiness and energy. Eventually, the evening was coming to an end, and they returned home, tired but happy. This walk was a special memory for them that Rick will hold in his heart for the rest of his life. Upon returning home, Rick noticed his wife's nervousness and her desire to hide from him. But while she fed her son and put him to bed, he decided not to broach the subject. Rick's parents were happy. "And now we have to go." Getting up from the chair, said Robert. "Kevin Iovich, goodbye." "Goodbye." Dad and Mom said goodbye. Nancy, escorting her husband's parents to the door. Rick escorted the guests out. Coming. Called back the spouse from the kitchen on New Year's Eve. All Otis and Senior Marlowe came over for the holiday long weekend, Kaline and Rick. They decorated a large Christmas tree in the backyard with colorful balls, garland, and tinsel. On top of it was a bright star that sparkled against the dark sky. The tree was decorated with great taste and love. Each element of decoration was carefully selected and harmoniously combined with the rest. The balls were of different sizes and colors, from small, silver to large golden garlands glowed with multicolored lights, creating an atmosphere of festivity and magic. The meeting of the new year was stormy and joyful. Everyone was happy. Everyone was playing and wanted to rest not only their bodies but also their souls, which they did very well. 3 months after the new year, the first cry of Ettore Marlowe, whom her parents were waiting for, was heard in the Tbilisi Maternity Hospital. They had long ago decorated the second nursery, decorating it in a delicate pink light. Fairy tale characters and beautiful flowers were drawn on the walls. In the corner of the room stood a small white crib decorated with lace and boughs. Next to the crib was a nightstand, on which there were soft toys and rattles. The floor was covered with a fluffy carpet, so that the baby could crawl and play on it in the future, and on the window hung curtains of transparent fabric, through which the sunlight penetrated, making the room even more cozy. When night came, the stars lit up the dark sky. The young family gathered around the cradle of their newborn baby. They looked at him with love and tenderness, as if he were the most precious treasure in the world. As they lifted little Noah up and introduced him to his sister, Nancy, and Rick could not be overjoyed at their happiness. The room was quiet, with only the sleeping baby's quiet breathing barely audible to the young parents. The parents smiled as they looked at Eteri and hugged their eldest son tightly. They knew that their love and care would protect them from all the troubles and dangers that might come their way. So they stood with their lives bent over the cradle and looked at their little miracle that had brought so much joy and happiness into their lives. They realized that their lives would now be filled with new worries and joys, but they were ready for it. After all, what could be better than loving and caring for their babies? Darling. Setting his son down on the floor and taking his hand, Rick spoke on his way to the older child's room. I'm so excited to get to see the first few months of our daughter's life. I'm glad to have you around this time too. Nancy hugged her husband. I can't stop berating myself for abandoning you then, leaving you in that position, forcing you to make the difficult decision to carry alone, to give birth without your husband, putting you to sleep. Noah kept whispering to his wife, Rick, I will never get tired of apologizing to you. Don't. Covering the door to his son's room, he snuggled into his husband's chest. Nancy, don't take old wounds. It's all in the past. Now you're around, and we're happy. Yes, we are happy, and we always will be. Rick gave his wife a big, tight hug. So idyllically, they went to their room 40 days after the baby girl was born. Under the roof of Nancy and Rick's house, a noisy crowd of relatives and close friends had gathered for Eteri's viewing party. The girl's parents invited all their near and dear ones to share the joy and show off their dark-haired and black-eyed and beautiful baby girl. The living room was decorated with balloons and garlands. Soft, quiet music was playing in the background, and a rich table was set in the center with vases of flowers in addition to food. Next to the fireplace was the small round crib where Terry also slept, snug in a soft blanket tied by her grandmother, Adriana. The guests approached the crib quietly, almost silently. To look at the baby and wish her health and happiness, they each brought a gift of a toy, clothes, books, or money. Nancy and Rick were happy to have such a celebration to share their joy with their loved ones and create memories that would be cherished for a lifetime. Thus began a new, but by no means the last chapter in the life of Nancy, Rick, Noah, and Eteri. The young couple's dream of a large family didn't remain just a dream. 7 children were born into their family. Rick worked tirelessly, developing Turkish business and opening branches in Russia. Nancy wrote fairy tales for children, which were so well liked by one publishing house that it signed a contract with her and began to publish them in impressive editions. The children grew up to the delight of their parents. They were friendly and loved each other on all holidays. In their house gathered a noisy crowd, where everyone was a relative or close friend. Each year, the number of people invited grew. Christopher got married, grew older. Molly changed boyfriends often, looking for her man. Lisa married and had 2 children. And Stephen and Adriana Otis unexpectedly had John. And all of them, the friendly Marlowe family, was always a pleasure to have in our home.